area of the Minsk agreements. Now, some of us, notwithstanding, that do not take our foreign policy lead from Henry Kissinger, there has been some calls from the Republican right to negotiate on that ceded territory. The Foreign Secretary is on the record saying that UK sanctions will be in place until all Russian troops have left Ukrainian territory. The very thing that Putin wants at this time, in what will be a long-term protracted conflict, will be Western division. What mechanisms are in place that the UK can take to ensure that that division does not arise?
My Lords, it's been very important on showing unity of purpose and unity of action. The Noble Lord mentions the role of sanctions, and as the Noble Lord say, it's something I believe in passionately, is those sanctions have worked, because where there have been one country or one region leading in front of another, we've coordinated, we've worked together, and those sanctions are hurting Russia, they're hurting Mr. Putin, and they're hurting the government and all those who support it. It's important we retain this, and as the Noble Lord Collins said, and I'm in total agreement, that any negotiation must be led by Ukraine, and it's a job of any alliance, any partner, any friend to be firmly behind Ukraine.
Your Lordships will know that in 1938, France and the United Kingdom imposed upon Czechoslovakia a deal they'd come to with the Third Reich. This is not a good precedent. The government is rightly being praised from both sides for its actions on Ukraine. Can my noble friend assure me that we are talking to our allies, in particular France and Germany, that they will not try and impose their own settlement on Ukraine, and it must be the Ukrainians who lead and we support them?
My Lords, I totally agree with my noble friend, and the government is very much engaging at the very top level, and my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, engages regularly with President Zelensky and the principles he's articulated. And let's be very clear, President Zelensky has said to Mr. Putin, let's meet directly, and it's important we get behind his efforts.
To recall that the Foreign Secretary spoke of reclaiming all the lands lost by Ukraine, which presumably would include Crimea, and be a recipe for continued and long-term conflict. That was at a time when President Zelensky was speaking of returning to the borders of February the 24th, although I concede he has hardened his line a little, but essentially he has been pragmatic. Was it not unwise of the Foreign Secretary to be more hardline than the President?
My Lords, what my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, articulated is the basis of international borders and recognising the sovereignty and integrity of Ukraine. The 2014 annexation of Crimea was illegal.
My Lords, in relation to the impending food crisis and the 20 million tonnes of grain that are being held hostage by Russia in Ukraine's Black Sea ports, yesterday the Russian Deputy Minister Rudenko offered to provide a corridor for vessels carrying food to leave Ukraine, but only if some sanctions were lifted. Can I ask my noble friend the Minister what the government's position is on this?
Let me assure my noble friend, the issue of food security is very much at the forefront of our not just thinking but our policy, and over the next 3 years we will direct over £3 billion of support to the most vulnerable countries, particularly from Africa. Foreign Minister Kaluba said yesterday, I believe in engaging with G7 partners, that this agricultural crisis is not just for one cycle but will be repeated. There is grain which is currently in Ukraine. The issue is Odessa is blocked, the Black Sea is blocked, and it is mined. And it requires Russia not just to show full cooperation but to pull back. You could demine certain parts where the Ukrainians have themselves provided mines, which they know where they are, and the support. But equally, what guarantees do we have that once you get into the Black Sea, and that's where the issue of Crimea comes up, that the Black Sea allows Russia to really just embargo any ship going through, and, of course, mines remain a constant challenge.
My Lords, it is quite clear that the euphoria, I think rather early euphoria, about how Ukraine was doing has got to be tempered now. There is no doubt that the Russians have twigged what a shambles they've made of this, and they're focusing on much smaller areas in the Donbass, for example. And so this war will grind on, and Putin shows no desire to actually have some form of agreement. We know he behaves appallingly, and we know they lie about these things. That means this war has got to continue, because he will not come to the table until he finds that it's causing real pain and the sanction things start hitting. Therefore, it's important we keep supplying weapons to the Ukraine, keep up that flow. Can I ask a very precise question? A lot of the weapons we've been providing at the moment are from orders that were for people within Western Europe, and we have sending to them. We have not let contracts to enable our arms manufacturers to produce these weapons for our own stocks and to replace the weapons that are being used in Ukraine. Could the Noble Lord the Minister confirm that these orders are going to be let? Because it's gone on and hasn't happened.
My Lords, without getting into the specific of each contract, of course that's a lead for the Ministry of Defence. I will look through the question of the Noble Lord and answer appropriately.
Question? Lord Speaker. I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, no assessment has been made. The Government is aware of concerns about the cost of living, and my friend, the Chancellor, is making an announcement on this today. Since 2010, the full yearly amount of the basic state pension has risen by over £2,300 in cash terms, and that's £720 more than if it had been uprated by prices, and £570 more than if it had been uprated by earnings. State pension recipients are also supported by further measures for older people.
How much is the state? Order. My Lords, I thank the Minister for her reply. In 2019, 68,000 pensioners died in poverty. That number will increase as the real value of state pension has been cut and another £800 energy rise is coming. Can the Minister immediately commit to an increase of 15% in the state pension? If not, can she return to this House in 2 weeks' time and explain why the Treasury is failing to support our pensioners?
The Noble Lord will understand I can't make that commitment. Well, we understand that people are struggling, we really do, with rising prices on energy and other things. The Chancellor was clear that the situation, as it evolves, so will our response, with the most vulnerable being his #1 priority. And he will set out more details today, and all Noble Lords and myself will have to wait to hear what he says.
What is the Government doing to help pensioners with the cost of living crisis? This is an emergency. Age UK have just released a report, It Doesn't Add Up, which quotes single pensioners who are anxious and depressed. I shower once a fortnight, use the oven once a week. I don't know what else I can do. There is more the Government can do, and I know my noble friend cares deeply about this issue. Would she urge the Treasury to look at issues such as the standing charge that single pensioners pay, increasing the value of the Warm Homes discount, which is still just £140 after 10 years, and increasing perhaps the pension credit by £20 a week for this emergency situation?
Well, I thank my noble friend for the points that she has made, and I've no desire to wind everybody up, but please can we wait and listen to what the Chancellor says, and then perhaps we can speak again on your question.
Yeah.
Oh, you got it.
My Lords,
there's plenty of time. We could have the cross benches and then we could have Labour.
my Lords, having been asked to wait, does the Minister agree that along with some pensioners, the most vulnerable people in our society are those of working age who cannot work, with disabilities, mental health problems, other issues? I understand from the, how can I put it, media reports that the Chancellor will be focusing help on working age people who can work and urging them into work with incentives and so on. Will the Minister draw to the attention of the Treasury this incredibly vulnerable group of people who will simply not be helped at all, according to the press reports of the Treasury support?
I can confirm to the Noble Baroness and the whole House that the Chancellor and his team are cognizant of the issues that the most vulnerable are facing. Those who can't work, those who are in work but wish to do better. And he's clear that as this situation has evolved, his response will evolve too, and that the most vulnerable are right at the heart of what the government want to do. So please be patient.
They said that before the pandemic, 1.3 million pensioners in England were suffering from the nutrition. It adds that 1.4 million older people have been eating less since the start of the pandemic and are at greater risk of becoming malnourished. Can the Minister explain what estimate the government has made of the risk of malnutrition amongst pensioners, and what are we doing about it?
Yeah.
Well, in this very difficult time, we have sought to help pensioners. The very specific point you raise about malnutrition, I will need, if you accept it, to write to you and place a copy to all noble lords in the library.
My lords, isn't it the case? Isn't it the case? Isn't it the case that the level of state pension in this country at less than £9,000 is not a sum that most people can live on, expected to live on? In Germany, the state pension is £26,000 a year. In France, it's £15,800. Does the government now regret suspending the triple lock?
Yeah. Well, the noble lords will know that the triple lock was suspended for this year for very difficult circumstances within the country, but the Chancellor has confirmed that the triple lock will be reinstated.
How much has the state pension increased, both as a proportion and as an amount of money, since 2010?
As I've said earlier, the state pension since 2010 has risen by £2,300 in cash terms, and the full yearly basic state pension is now over 45% higher than in 2010.
I'm glad the Chancellor is finally putting something on the table, but although we don't yet know what it is. But does the Minister agree that this is not a great process? The spring budget was only 2 months ago. We begged the Chancellor to do more on the cost of living, and he ignored it. We suggested a windfall tax, and the Prime Minister ridiculed it. My lords, the government didn't have to legislate for the biggest real terms cut in the value of the state pension for 50 years. Now, we don't know yet what the Chancellor's going to do. But can I ask the Minister, the rumours appear to be always about one-off payments again. But even if there is something to tide people over, this isn't going to deal with the collapse in the standards of living. So can I ask, why have ministers ruled out bringing forward pension and benefit increases? Does the Minister accept prices are unlikely suddenly to slump again, but if they did, of course, up ratings would pick that up next time round anyway? Or will the Chancellor be back here again in a few months?
If you don't mind, I don't agree that the Chancellor has ignored things. He's had a pretty difficult set of circumstances to deal with. And we are, due to the legacy benefits, we can only do an uprating once a year, for which reasons all noble lords will know. But since 1987, we've consistently used the September's inflation figure, and that will continue.
My Lord, the Household Support Fund, thank you. The Household Support Fund is earmarked, 1/3 of which should go to pensioners. The second tranche, £500 million, which isn't a great deal, came into play on April the 1st this year. So could the noble lady, the Minister, tell us how much of that fund has already been exhausted, how quickly the first tranche was exhausted, and what work has been done to evaluate the effectiveness of the Household Support Fund?
Confirm that the Department for Work and Pensions requires local authorities to provide management information returns detailing their spend and volume of awards made in relation to food, energy and water bills, and management information returns for the scheme running from 6th of October 2021 to the 31st of March 2022 will also detail grant spend and the volume of awards made in relation to families with and without children. MI for the scheme running from the 6th of October 2021 to the 31st of March 2022 will be published in the coming months.
My Lord, will the government look again at the issue I think it's this side. This side.
Yeah, this side.
My lords, does noble Baroness understand that pensioners' incomes this time this year are 5% lower in real terms than they were last year? Part of the reason for that is the excessive delay between when we have the index and when increases are paid. Isn't it about time that the state pension was fully computerised so that increases could be made that meet the challenge of inflation?
Yeah. As I've already said, the state pension uprating relies on legacy IT systems that must be coded well in advance of uprating. The noble lord makes a very good point about the impact of good IT systems. I'm not going to argue with that. But additionally, state pension rates need to be confirmed in advance of uprating because claimants can claim their state pension 4 months before they reach state pension age and need certainty about the value of their entitlement.
Reading of a private member's bill, Lord Best, on behalf of Lord Crisp.
My Lords, on behalf of my noble friend Lord Crisp, I beg to introduce a bill to make provision for the delivery of healthy homes and neighbourhoods, to set out the principles that define a healthy home, to establish the office of the Healthy Homes Commissioner, and for connected purposes. I beg to move that this bill be now read a first time.
The question is that this bill be now read a first time. As many as are of that opinion will say content. The contrary not content. The contents have it. First reading of a private member's bill, Lord Hayward.
My Lords, I beg to introduce a bill to make provision for ensuring the secrecy of ballots cast in polling stations at elections, to require the Secretary of State to publish related guidance and for connected purposes. I beg to move that this bill be now read a first time.
The question is that this bill be now read a first time. As many as are of that opinion, will say content. The contrary not content. The contents have it.
Message from the Commons that they have passed the Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Bill, to which they desire the agreement of your Lordships.
This bill be now read a first time. As many as of that opinion will say...
My Lords, Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Bill, I beg to move that this bill be now read a first time.
The question is that this bill be now read a first time. As many as of that opinion will say content. The contrary not content. The contents have it. My Lords, we come to an instrument previously debated in Grand Committee. Russia Sanctions EU Exit, Amendment number 9. Regulations 2022. Lord Ahmad of Wimbledon.
My Lords, I beg to move the motion standing in my name on the order paper en bloc.
The question is that this motion be agreed to. As many as of that opinion will say content. The contrary not content. The contents have it. My Lords, we now come to another instrument previously debated in Grand Committee. Pollution, Prevention and Control Fees, Miscellaneous Amendments, Regulations 2022. Lord Callanan.
My Lords, I beg to move the motion standing in my name on the order paper.
The question is that this motion be agreed to. As many as of that opinion will say content. The contrary not content. The contents have it.
My Lords, for the convenience of the House, I'd like to make a short statement about forthcoming recess dates. As usual, to save members reaching for their diaries, a note of all the dates I'm about to announce will be available in the printed paper office before I sit down. In a bid to be helpful to the House, we're planning ahead to next February. I should therefore put particular stress on the usual caveat that the planned recesses are provisional and subject to the progress of business. My Lords, as we've already announced, we expect summer recess will start at the end of business on Thursday the 21st of July, and the House will return on Monday the 5th of September. For the conference recess, we expect to adjourn at the end of business on Thursday the 15th of September and return on Monday the 10th of October. In November, we'll have the usual short break, with the House expected to adjourn at the end of business on Wednesday the 9th of November and return on Monday the 14th of November. For Christmas recess, we expect to adjourn at the end of business on Wednesday the 21st of December and return on Monday the 9th of January. And finally, my Lords, for the February in 2023 recess, we expect to adjourn proceedings at the end of business on Thursday the 9th of February and return on Monday the 20th of February. And further dates will be announced later in the session.
A bicameral House. Can I just ask the Chief Whip whether these recess dates coincide with those in the Commons, and if not, why not?
The recess do coincide except for the exception of the September, when Commons will rise a week later on the 22nd of September and return a week later on the 17th of November. There is... Give me a chance. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. They will return a week later on the 17th of October. That's the only difference. It's not unprecedented for there to be a slight difference in plans around this time, as there was in the last session. Sometimes we start business earlier, and that allows the minimum intervals to take place. Normally, we interlink, but it doesn't have to be like that. We are our own house. We determine our own dates, and there's no particular reason why it has to be the same.
Party meetings. There are a lot of meetings, political meetings, non-political meetings. There's a whole lot of business where both houses work closely together. And during the last time, as the Chief Whip rightly said, when we had separate dates, it did create a lot of problems. There were things happening down at the other end that we should have been participating in. I hope that the Chief Whip will go back and have another look at this and see if he can find a way of getting them to coincide.
Well, I'm always open to suggestions, and I don't say that I won't look at it. However, there doesn't have to be, and I accept the points that in some cases an APPG might take place, but of course we're giving people plenty of warning on this, so they are able to arrange the dates that suit them to combine with both houses, and it is perfectly possible to work around this. Sometimes it helps if we come back 1 week different to get business done, and vice versa, so business can come from the Commons to us. We don't have to be the same, but I take the point. I think it's unlikely, having made those decisions, that it will change.
I just say thank you to the Chief Whip for giving us such advance notice, which for years we've asked for that. Now we've got it, and people are carping about it. I think he's to be congratulated.
Endorsing what the noble Lord said, I welcome the fact we can look some distance ahead. There are other problems. There are joint committees. For example, I serve on the Joint Committee for Human Rights. We cannot sit if both houses are not sitting simultaneously. It means we lose a whole committee date. And we can't be flexible about that. These are joint committees of both houses. It doesn't make any sense.
They are joint committees of both houses, and there's 1 week when they won't be sitting together. Therefore, another 50 weeks when they can, 51 weeks, sorry, when they can sit together. So I don't think it's, amongst the many problems we face, I don't think that's an insuperable one.
Can I just ask the Chief Whip to acknowledge one other problem, which is that if the Commons are sitting and we are not, and something of significance occurs requiring a statement from the government, we are not in a position to follow up that statement in a timely way. Right. And that has happened in the past. Does you not think that's something to be considered?
Of course, the same applies the other way around. When we're sitting in the House of Commons aren't, and they are able to cope with that. It is true that they, in that 1 week, they won't be able to. But I think those, as I said before, are not insuperable problems. And I've also said to the noble Lord Fuchs, I will look at it, but I don't think it's very likely it will change. But I've said I'll look at it. It may not. It may be possible. It may not. I think it's unlikely, but I will look at it.
Well done. Yeah. My Lords, before asking the Leader of the House to begin the next business, I wish to offer a few short words of tribute to Her Majesty from the Woolsack. It was a privilege on my very first day as Lord Speaker to welcome Her Majesty to Parliament for state opening in 2021. Although my first state opening in the role, It is the case that Her Majesty has attended every state opening bar 3 since the beginning of her reign in 1952. Her loyal and steadfast presence is a constant feature of British life and helps bind us together in an increasingly polarised world. Her Majesty, throughout the magnificence of her reign, has been the supreme example of integrity in public life, and she continues to show an unwavering duty and devotion. Her long record of public service is recognised not only within the United Kingdom, but globally, especially within the Commonwealth, which she has served with great distinction over many decades. This chamber, being the place where the three elements of Parliament come together, has an important connection with Her Majesty. Behind me, the Sovereign's throne is one of the reminders of the crucial role she plays in our Constitution, in opening Parliament and in signing our bills into law. Since her accession 70 years ago, the world has witnessed an extraordinary series of societal changes and historical events. From the beginnings of the post-war settlement and the development of mass communications through to the end of the Cold War, the fight against climate change and the transformation brought about by the Internet. Historians will recognise the Elizabethan age as a time of extraordinary change. Across all of these world-changing events and many more, Her Majesty has represented an essential point of continuity while still embracing modernity in her work as our head of state. Her leadership, and that of the late Prince Philip with his Duke of Edinburgh awards, has inspired thousands of people, especially young people, to develop their skills and to work to improve society and the environment. Awards and initiatives led by them have seen millions of people develop, grow and perform outstanding achievements in the service of their communities. Today, this House has the privilege of marking Her Majesty the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, and I am sure that I speak for the whole House in expressing the deepest thanks for Her Majesty's 70 years of unparalleled, exemplary and devoted service. I call on the Lord Privy Seal to move the motion for a humble address.
My Lords, I beg to move that a humble address be presented to Her Majesty as follows. Most gracious Sovereign, we, Your Majesty's most dutiful and loyal subjects, the Lords spiritual and temporal in Parliament assembled, beg leave to offer Your Majesty the heartfelt good wishes and loyal devotion of the House on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of your accession to the throne, expressing its deep gratitude for Your Majesty's lifelong, unstinting service, leadership and commitment to the United Kingdom, dependencies and territories, your other realms and the Commonwealth. My Lords, this is a formal occasion for us, as the Upper House, to pay tribute to our Sovereign. But for many noble Lords, myself included, this is also a personal occasion, a chance to pay tribute to an inspirational woman who has dedicated her life to public service. I know many noble Lords enjoy a personal relationship with Her Majesty the Queen, and I look forward to hearing all contributions to the debate today. The Queen has been an enduring presence in our national story over the past 70 years. The United Kingdom of today looks markedly different to that of 1952 when she ascended the throne, and yet Her Majesty has remained a constant presence in our lives, upholding the best of tradition while progressing and moving with the times. The Queen has given 7 decades of dedicated service. Just as she proclaimed she would at the age of 21, she has devoted her life to the United Kingdom, the realms and the Commonwealth. Her ongoing commitment to public service is beyond question, and we are all immensely grateful for it. My Lords, we in this House have a special relationship with the Sovereign because the Crown is an integral part of the Parliament to which we all belong. During her reign, the Queen has given royal assent to some 3,833 public bills. The Sovereign also has the right to consult, encourage and warn the government of the day, and the 14 Prime Ministers who have served through her reign have all benefited greatly from the Queen's enormous experience. And your Lordship's House is often credited with providing the institutional memory of our country's governance. The Chamber is indeed filled with years of wisdom. But even the aggregate experience amassed in the Chamber today, substantial though it is, cannot match that which the Queen brings to her role. Her Majesty is unique in many obvious ways, in being the monarch, in being our longest ever reigning monarch, and the first to celebrate a Platinum Jubilee. But also uniquely, she has met more international leaders than any living person on this planet, from Nelson Mandela to the Dalai Lama, from Charles de Gaulle to Ronald Reagan. The Queen has been both a witness to and an active participant in the past 70 years of world history. And during that time, she has performed her role as the head of the Commonwealth with great energy, driving forward this remarkable organisation which spans 54 independent and equal countries and nearly a third of the world's population. From Australia to Antigua, Canada to Cameroon, the Commonwealth is a unique association spanning almost every region and religion. Her Majesty is also head of state for the 14 Commonwealth Realms, where her Jubilee will be celebrated just as it is here in the United Kingdom. And another institution which the Queen heads is, of course, our armed forces. It is to her that our military personnel swear allegiance. But she also has a strong personal connection as wife, mother and grandmother of individuals who have served. Indeed, the Queen herself joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service during the Second World War, training as a driver and mechanic, becoming the first female member of the royal family to join the armed services as a full-time active member. And this is just one early example of her remarkable ability to move with the times, something she has done consistently over the past 7 decades. More recently, in 2020, as vast swathes of the country were working via Zoom, I was present, along with the Queen, at the first ever virtual Privy Council meeting in our history. And just this week, we saw the addition of a motorised golf buggy to the Royal Fleet, used to give Her Majesty a grand tour of the Chelsea Flower Show. But, my lords, the Queen's reign would not have been the same without Prince Philip by her side. In Her Majesty's own words, he was her strength and stay. As noble lords know, they enjoyed many happy occasions with their family at Sandringham, and it is a place Prince Philip chose to spend his time once he stepped back from public life. And I can well understand their affection for the estate, as my husband is MP for North West Norfolk, and fortunate that Sandringham is in his constituency. Over the last couple of years, we too have spent many happy hours as visitors, enjoying the grounds and the many events that take place there. The Queen's extraordinary range of knowledge on just about any subject has always been impressive, and this is ever evident at the state dinners and diplomatic receptions, some of which I have been fortunate to attend. She's naturally inquisitive, interested in everyone and everything, ensuring she gets the best out of any situation. I first had an audience with Her Majesty upon being appointed a government whip and Baroness-in-Waiting. In our first meeting, our conversation spanned from international football, the domestic issues of the day, and, of course, most importantly, her horse's prospects at Royal Ascot. And the Queen has always loved horses. She has a real affinity with them. When I was just 5 years old, a man fired several blank rounds in quick succession at the Queen during the Trooping the Colour parade, startling all the horses around. She was able to keep control of her horse with characteristic calmness and a pat on the neck, and undeterred by the rather serious incident that had taken place, continued with the parade. And her knowledge of horses goes far beyond skillful handling. One of her homebred mares, Balmoral Layer, won the Highland Pony title at the Royal Windsor Horse Show just a couple of weeks ago. My lords, the Queen takes people as they are. While always conscious of the dignity of the crown, she possesses a remarkable lightness of manner. She appears just as comfortable presiding over state dinners as she is rambling around the countryside in well-worn waterproofs. And indeed, the sight of Her Majesty driving herself to church is as familiar to all of us as her travelling in the state coach. But at least these are two of the more traditional methods of transportation, because noble lords will no doubt recall the Queen's cameo alongside James Bond in the opening ceremony of the 2012 Olympic Games, in which the Queen's journey from Buckingham Palace culminated, as far as viewers were concerned, in a royal parachute jump. We found out later that she'd orchestrated this without anyone in her family knowing, so they must have been even more surprised than we were at the scene. And, my lords, the Queen certainly has a wry sense of humour. Noble lords may have heard the story of the lady in Norfolk who, on encountering Her Majesty entering a shop, told her, "You look just like the Queen," to which she replied, "How reassuring." And that encounter is a reminder of the Queen's own words in her 1991 Christmas message. "Let us not take ourselves too seriously. None of us has a monopoly on wisdom." My lords, we are celebrating this remarkable Jubilee, not simply because of the unprecedented duration of the Queen's reign, but because of the deep affection and respect that she commands in the hearts of the people of this country. Affection and respect unmatched by any monarch in our time. We remain deeply thankful to Her Majesty for all she does for the nation and look forward to her Jubilee celebrations next week. My lords, I beg to move the motion for an humble address to Her Majesty.
My lords, it's a great... Oh, sorry. Forgot that bit.
That an humble address be presented to Her Majesty to offer the heartfelt good wishes and loyal devotion of the House on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of her accession to the throne, expressing its deep gratitude for Her Majesty's lifelong, unstinting service, leadership and commitment to the United Kingdom, dependencies and territories, the other realms and the Commonwealth.
My lords, it is a great privilege to follow the noble Baroness, the Leader of the House, in paying tribute to Her Majesty the Queen. And it's also a pleasure and privilege to speak from these benches and offer Her Majesty our congratulations on the occasion of her Platinum Jubilee. Members of your Lordship House are no strangers to long periods of public service. We are all motivated by the desire to serve the people and improve their lives. But I'm sure you will all agree that Her Majesty is in a league of her own. Both in terms of duration and dedication, no one can compare. Her sense of duty is well known to us all. Her Majesty is rightly respected for her almost complete avoidance of party political controversy during her long reign. This is all the more remarkable given that she is from a trade unionist background. Her mother and father were honorary bummeries, porters at Smithfield Meat Market, and members of my union then, the Transport and General Workers Union, now, of course, better known as Unite. The Queen Mother was delighted to be a member. She and George VI were admirers of the union's former General Secretary, Ernest Bevin, of course, who went on to serve as a distinguished member of the War Cabinet and of Foreign Secretary. He's one of my own personal heroes, but I know he was hugely respected by both King George VI and the Queen Mother, Queen Elizabeth, but also by Her Majesty the Queen. And as the noble lady, the Leader of the House, said, Her Majesty, of course, is the head of the armed forces, and this is a role that she has always taken seriously, and we have all memories of the Trooping of the Colour and leading remembrance at Sunday at the Cenotaph. And as the noble lady said, it's not just an official role. It's very much personal to her, having many family members who've served and having served herself in the Second World War, as well as numerous visits to military establishments and hosting events for servicemen and women at royal residences. In 2009, Her Majesty introduced the Elizabeth Cross, the first medal named after a reigning monarch since the George Cross in 1940, which gives special recognition to the families of service personnel killed during military operations and as victims of terrorism since 1948. In a changing world, she has been a reassuring, constant presence, the likes of which we may never see again. She has in many ways been a bridge from one era to another, connecting different generations through the decades. Britain in 1952 was a vastly different place to the country we live in today, a nation emerging from the ravages of a world war with rationing still in place. The challenges of the Cold War and the nuclear age were still in their infancy. The NHS was only just 4 years old, just the one TV channel, and only 150,000 homes even had access to a television set. No personal computers, no mobile phones, no internet. Fast forward 70 years, and not only has the technology transformed, but all of our lives, mostly for the better. But our society is a very different place. We are now a much more diverse and vibrant country, being home to people from across the globe. Opportunities for women have been transformed, though there's still a long way to go. In 1952, I could not have married my husband. In fact, I would have been at risk of arrest and prosecution just for being who I am. But as our country has changed, so too has the Queen. Everyone changes over the years, but Her Majesty has adapted and modernised the monarchy in ways that mean even many Republicans have huge personal admiration and affection for her. The Queen is the personal embodiment of the nation and a huge asset to us all. Instantly recognisable across the globe, she's met almost every significant world leader of the past 70 years. And more importantly, they have all wanted to meet her. We often talk about soft power in this place, and Her Majesty epitomises it. Politicians come and go, and some are more loved than others. But to maintain the Queen's level of respect and popularity over 7 decades takes a real talent. My Lords, 10 years ago, on the occasion of the Golden Jubilee, my noble friend, the then Leader of the Opposition, Baroness Royal, spoke about the falling esteem in which politics and politicians are held. Sadly, a situation little improved, if not worse, a decade on. My noble friend contrasted this with the affection for Her Majesty and said we had much to learn from her. I know it's a recipe that we all wish we knew the ingredients of, but we can take a guess at some of them. Not only her sense of duty and devotion to public service, but a strong work ethic, a love of country and the Commonwealth, and a sense of humour, as the noble lady has mentioned. And she also had, as she said, the love and support of the Duke of Edinburgh. Prince Philip was a remarkable individual in his own right, outspoken, sometimes irreverent, and at all times totally human. His support has been vital. As a consort of the monarch for some 69 years, he not only provided invaluable support for Her Majesty, but made a huge impact on the life of our country in his own right. The noble lady mentioned the Duke of Edinburgh Awards, and that has impacted on the lives of countless young people here in the UK and in some 144 countries worldwide. Over the years since its founding in 1956, many leaders from the arts to business to politics have undertaken the awards. The promotion of volunteering, physical exercise, the development of personal skills and exploration is a great benefit not only to the participants, but also to their communities and countries. It is a legacy that will endure. Sadly, I got lost on my orienteering exercise on Chobham Common, so never made it past the bronze stage. So let this Platinum Jubilee be a celebration of community, selflessness, and serving others. A celebration all that is positive about our public life and institutions. A break from the usual daily diet of cynicism and scepticism. A truly national celebration of a head of state like no other.
My Lords, it's a great privilege to speak on behalf of these benches on the occasion of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. My Lords, the Queen is the only monarch I've known in my lifetime. I was born less than 4 months before the coronation. Indeed, to mark this event, I was given, aged 4 months, a commemorative coronation half-pint beer mug bearing the royal crest. My mother, as a strict Methodist teetotaler, was black-affronted by the gift, and for many years it sat unused at the back of her kitchen cupboard. As a teetotaler, she'd no use for it. As a royalist, she couldn't throw it out. My Lords, this demonstrates how difficult it is for the monarchy to please everybody. My Lords, the Queen's reign is remarkable in many respects. Firstly, of course, for its length. Secondly, for the unchanging pattern of life which the Queen has followed. Christmas at Sandringham, August in Balmoral, garden parties, Ascot, state visits and diplomatic receptions. On the surface, many things have hardly changed in 70 years. Yet thirdly, the non-royal world has changed beyond recognition, not just in material terms, but also in attitudes, as the noble Lord Collins said, attitudes towards women, to homosexuals, to the ethnic minority communities and other minorities. And in some respects, most relevantly, by an almost complete collapse in the deference which is shown to institutions and the people who represent them. As a result, what the nation expects of the monarch has also subtly changed. When the Queen came to the throne, many millions of people treated the institution of monarchy reverentially and were more than satisfied if the Queen performed her constitutional duties, from the state opening of Parliament to the appointment of sheriffs, in a dignified and suitably regal manner. Over time, however, the countries looked to the Queen to speak for it in moments of trauma and difficulty, and to do so in a manner which is studiously politically neutral. It's also required the stripping away of the mystique of royalty. People have demanded far more openness in the way the royal family presents itself. And there's been far more public scrutiny of every aspect of the life, not only of the Queen herself, but also of all other members of the royal family. The Queen's been able to navigate these swirling currents of changing times by basing her life on unchanging principles. 3 stand out. First, an overriding commitment to the service of the nation and to her duty to represent its traditions and values. Second, a firm Christian faith which has permeated her whole approach to life and has underpinned her sense of service to others. And third, a sense of obligation towards our former colonies and to the Commonwealth, as its relationship to the UK has evolved very substantially over the decades since her accession. These 3 strands are most publicly brought together in the Queen's annual Christmas Day broadcast, when Her Majesty, reflecting on the past year, draws out lessons which she commends the nation to follow in the succeeding one. Typically, the concepts of community, generosity, kindness, and service to others permeate what she has to say. My Lords, these are timeless virtues, but ones of which we need constant reminding. My Lords, as the Queen reaches this Jubilee, it's inevitable that she's gradually reducing the scale of her activities and is gradually passing on her responsibilities to Prince Charles and Prince William. In them, the country is fortunate in having future monarchs for whom her sense of duty is equally replicated. My Lords, anyone who's had any personal dealings with the Queen will be remembering them over this Jubilee period. I was fortunate to serve as a member of the Royal Household for 3 years from 2012 as Captain of the Queen's Bodyguard of the Yeomen of the Guard. And in that capacity, I met the Queen on a number of occasions. Two stand out today. Firstly, during my term of office, the yeomen had a formal dinner with wives at St James's Palace. It was the depth of winter. The Queen and Prince Philip, in formal attire, attended a pre-dinner reception and, in customary manner, spoke to groups of yeomen organised in a horseshoe in one of the grand reception rooms of the palace. My job, in theory, was to guide the Queen round the room. The truth was that she was so accomplished at this sort of thing that she, in effect, guided me round the room. She spoke to each group with energy, wit, and evident enjoyment. She finished the horseshoe within a minute of the time allocated. Every attendee was made to feel special. It was a bravura performance at a private event which the Queen was not required to attend, which she went to out of a sense of duty, and at which she played her part to perfection. And second, in the aftermath of the 2015 general election, I ceased to be the captain of the Queen's bodyguard, and as tradition requires, I had to have an audience with the Queen to hand back my staff of office. As I was waiting to see Her Majesty, I noticed that it said around the rim, "For the use of the captain of the Yeomen of the Guard, for the time being." I pointed this out to the Queen and said that my time had now obviously been. She smiled sympathetically, but when my successor, the noble Lord Gardiner of Kimball, followed me into the audience room to receive the staff, the Queen pointed out to him that it was only for his use for the time being. It demonstrated a sharp mind and a gentle wit, two extremely endearing qualities. It's memories like these which certainly endear the Queen to me, and similar experiences which endear her to so many people in the country. I've been very fortunate to live under such a monarch, and in the words of the song, long may she reign.
Yeah. Well done. Very good. My Lords, on behalf of the crossbenchers, I have no doubt about one thing, that it's the first in my time, when the crossbenchers have been absolutely united and of the same voice. On the whole, we tend to disagree. We're rather a disparate bunch.
Many of them here.
We heard from the leader about the promise that the young Princess Elizabeth made in August 1947. It's a moving declaration to us, her future subjects. I was alive at the time, and I hope I can weary your lordships by just reading it out to you. I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of the great imperial family to which we all belong. I find that moving. 21 years old. How many of us thought we were making promises at the age of 21, which perhaps memory will teach us we had forgotten to keep? But this was a solemn, unequivocal promise, a living, lifetime promise, her whole life, made by a young woman who could not have known that the call to the burdens of duty and the assumption of responsibility, not as a princess, but as the Queen, as we now call it, the head of the Commonwealth, would come so early or would last so long. During her long reign, as the Lord Speaker touched on, the momentum for change has been irresistible. The speed of change has been explosive. There has never been a reign in which so much has changed more rapidly for so many people than this reign, ever in the history of the nation, and indeed, as has already been touched on by those who've gone ahead of me, in the history of mankind. And during all those years, decades of change, the Queen has been on duty, as our head of state, devoted to our service. On duty because she could never know, and nobody could ever know, when she might be called on to exercise her responsibilities. In our celebration, and Noble Lord Collins touched on this, I think we should remember not just ourselves and our grandchildren and children and so on, and our families. I think we should just remember the generations of her subjects who have been overtaken by time and who would have been so enthusiastic, forgive me, in the support of these proposals. I'm talking about my parents' generations, most of our parents' generations, some of us perhaps our grandparents' generation, who had endured the casualties and the hardships and the lamentations of the Second World War and its bleak aftermath. And they'd done it with such fortitude and resilience, and for whom in 1952 their lovely young Queen was a promise of a brighter future. Well, trumpets no longer sound for that rather remarkable quality, fortitude. It's very self-effacing. People don't highlight their own fortitude, do they? And they don't blow their own trumpets. But during all the years since 1952, the royal responsibilities have not lightened, and the difficulties have not disappeared. They have remained. And when we think about it and try and imagine, and we can only imagine, the specific and special demands which rest on the shoulders of the monarch, we can be sure that fulfilling her youthful promise has not always been easy. There must have been times, mustn't there? We all do it, I'm sorry to say so. Really? Do I have to stand up in the House and speak now is one such moment. We all have moments where we think, if only. And that's never happened here. My lords, it's with fortitude and with resilience, decade after decade, that lifetime promise of service has been fulfilled and is still being fulfilled. The speakers before me have highlighted individual moments, and no doubt the speakers after me will. I shall not do that. But what I do is adopt everything that has been said. My lords, we share on these benches the national outpouring of affection, admiration, respect, indeed, dare I say it, the joy in the fact that we have Her Majesty as our monarch. These moments are a fulfilment of her promises to us, and they have made her an inestimable blessing on this nation. My lords, the humble address is our unemotional but truly heartfelt way of saying thank you.
My lords, I'm delighted on behalf of the Lord Spiritual to offer hearty congratulations and profound gratitude, and in following Noble Lord Judge, joyful congratulations to Her Majesty the Queen on her Platinum Jubilee. I may not have been aware of the events of 6th of February 1952, unlike some of your Lordship's House, though being born just 2 months later, I can claim to have been eager to participate in the new Elizabethan age. From these benches, we reflect particularly on the solemnity of the coronation. It happened nearly a year later. And the setting of the constitutional roles of the sovereign in the wider realm of faith. That faith has been evident, as Noble Lord Newby has already mentioned, in the Queen's consistent, unstinting and prayerful support, not only for the Church of England as Supreme Governor, but of the Church of Scotland and people of Christian faith across the United Kingdom and the world. And the Queen's lifelong practice of public worship and private prayer has been a remarkable witness, not just to the much publicised Royal Maunday services and other great occasions in cathedrals and abbeys, but week by week, in St George's Chapel, Windsor, St Mary Magdalene Church, Sandringham, the place that's already been mentioned by the leader, or Crathy Church on Deeside. Of course, those who've had opportunity to preach at such services are grateful not only for the hospitality that surrounds them, but also for the much missed, stimulating theological discussions with the late Prince Philip. This reign has also seen a remarkable contribution, not just by one of the leading women of the world, as the leader's already said, but also in this opportunity in the last decade of her reign to see the inclusion of women in the leadership of the Church of England. And of course, through the Role of Sanctions Act 2015, to see those women bishops come into your lordship's house. But the connection between our sovereign who practices her faith and the national church is appreciated, perhaps surprisingly, especially in the interfaith communities of my own city region, not least at times of local strife or international discord. I've found time and time again people gaining reassurance and inspiration from a constitution and a sovereign that take faith and the virtues and values that spring from it seriously. As the Queen said in a speech at Lambeth Palace in 2012, the Church has a duty to protect the free practice of all faiths in this country, and affirming that gently and assuredly the Church of England has created an environment for other faith communities and indeed people of no faith to live freely. The expression of lived faith is no better seen and heard, as we've already heard today, in the brief and moving Christmas broadcasts, where the virtues of service and compassion are illustrated by the life of Jesus Christ, are rooted in shared fragile humanity and wisdom accumulated over more than 9 decades. It's most vivid, I think, in her Christmas message of 2020, in the midst of a pandemic, where the Queen combined Jesus, the light of the world, and she was prepared to say her own inner light, with recognition of the many faith festivals that we enjoy in this country, and those COVID volunteers across the Commonwealth, with a story told by Jesus, the parable of the Good Samaritan, ending, all were putting the lives of others above themselves. As we've heard, a modest, not reference to herself, who has exercised that virtue over 90 years, but promoting the values and virtues and service of others. So later this summer, we will witness the intercultural and worldwide life of the Commonwealth in the Games to be held in Birmingham and region. In 1952, we remember there were only a handful of nations in this movement that has now risen to some 72 today. And here we can see the Queen's commitment to unity and diversity, courageous and sometimes difficult conversations, and the higher purposes of our common humanity. And we may all trust that she enjoys the races at the Alexander Stadium as much as she does those at Ascot. So the Windsor Horse Show pageant started with the first Elizabeth, if you happen to see it. The nation, this nation, our nation, and many countries in the world has been blessed beyond measure by the faithful and continuing reign of Elizabeth II. She upholds the virtues of dignity of the Constitution, responsibility of duty to others, and a trusted relationship with her people, all undergirded by faith. Thanks be to Her Majesty. Thanks be to God.
My Lords, Elizabeth II, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of our other realms and territories, Queen, Head of the Commonwealth, Defender of the Faith. These are the opening words in the writ of summons from Her Majesty the Queen, which commands us to assemble here in Westminster, not Stoke-on-Trent, to treat and give our counsel And aren't we fortunate to be here on this day to do so, and to respond with one united voice in saying thank you. Thank you to our Queen for 70 years of dedicated service and for giving outstanding leadership to our country. She's England's 40th sovereign since William the Conqueror, and the first to celebrate a Platinum Jubilee, as my noble friend, the Leader of the House, pointed out in her splendid address. At a time, especially this week, when it seems all our institutions are under attack, be it Parliament, the Church, the civil service, the judiciary, government, our police, the city, the Bank of England, and the Fourth Estate, only the monarchy remains solid as a rock in the nation's esteem, respect, and affections. And for that, we owe everything to the example and sacrifice shown by Her Majesty. Yes, sacrifice. All of us who've served in government have been greatly honoured to do so. But I confess to secretly feeling a sense of relief when, after 10 years as a Minister of the Crown, I surrendered my seals of office to Her Majesty, and the daily tyranny of the red boxes ended, and I was once again in control of my life and my diary, and I and my family out of the public eye. For Her Majesty the Queen, her whole life, as the noble Lord Judge pointed out, her whole life from the age of 25 has been one of selfless dedication to our country and the Commonwealth. And despite intense global scrutiny, she's done so without putting a foot wrong. She is, of course, very well informed and knowledgeable and has opinions. But even in this age, when it seems everything is leaked, none of us know what they are. Duty is her guiding star in everything she does, something that might be more closely emulated by some others in our public life. For hundreds of thousands of people across the globe, and here at home, the day they met the Queen is never to be forgotten. This includes heads of state. I mean, think of her Majesty's skill in engaging so brilliantly with everyone from President Ceausescu to Donald Trump, from Mandela to President Reagan. For most people, though, the meeting might only be fleeting, perhaps 45 seconds. But what the Queen said and what the occasion was will be retold many times, as the noble Lord Newby demonstrated in his excellent speech. A friend whose mother was sadly suffering from dementia told me that producing the photograph of her meeting the Queen would bring her back in conversation, smiling and recalling that red letter day. I was struck as a constituency MP visiting nursing homes. I had a marginal seat, so I visited them very regularly. On how many occasions the residents were determined to get to 100 years old in order to get their telegram from the Queen. And am I alone? Obviously not, listening to the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Birmingham, but I thought I might not be alone in welling up when listening to Her Majesty's broadcasts at 3 o'clock on Christmas Day, and being inspired by her example of a life lived in the Christian faith and committed to unity, belief in ourselves as a nation, and common purpose. Her Majesty can also call people to account, as when she called the so-called Masters of the Universe when they were left speechless following the financial crisis of 2008, when she simply asked, "Why did none of you see this coming?" A question she may very well be asking again in the difficult months that lie ahead. We get the occasional glimpse of her private life with her love of horses and corgis, which have been mentioned already, and of course, Balmoral in Scotland and Sandringham in Norfolk, where she can enjoy a more relaxed time. That sense of humour which has been referred to, that dry sense of humour and wit, is often on display, as on the occasion of a Privy Council meeting when someone's mobile phone went off. The Queen said, "You might want to take that, it might be someone important." Today we begin our proceedings by praying for our Sovereign's long life and health, as this House has done on every sitting day since 1952. And all of us can share in that sentiment. So, my lords, I say, aren't we lucky? Long may she reign over us. God save the Queen.
Yeah. My lords, Her Majesty has been a public servant for the whole of my life and for most of the people in this chamber. She referred to her late father's selfless dedication, and she has kept her promise faithfully to follow that selfless dedication. A public servant who can't answer back, but who set an example most recently during lockdown, getting right to the heart of the family, the impact of grief and isolation and separation, praise for the health service, and steadying the ship. One can't help reflecting on one's own life, because the Queen has always been there. She was appointed a Councillor of State when she was 18 years old and replied to Parliament's address on behalf of the throne in the year that I was born. The coronation, a spoon, a mug, and a New Testament, and games on the recreation ground that we called the Rec in Royal Leamington Spa. It didn't occur to us that some people might be watching the event on TV. Receiving 2 honours from the Queen at Buckingham Palace, surrounded by proud family members, every one of them a Republican. And then arriving here in 2010, affirming loyalty to Her Majesty and her heirs and successors. How often have we sat watching for the stumble on her heirs and successors? I did think about this. How does someone brought up in a family who were not monarchists pledge loyalty to Her Majesty? Some people might go through the motions, but I did think about it. I remembered something an old friend said to me in the 70s when the Queen was having a bad time. And I told him I thought the UK would never reject the monarchy. He was quite philosophical. He was even further to the left than I was at the time. And he said, just think of the alternative. I did, and I didn't like it. So my affirmation in 2010 was sincere. Harriet Baldwin MP wrote in the Telegraph about the Queen as a role model for women, and she referred to the change in the law in 2013 to enable the firstborn child, the monarch, who should be next in line to ascend the throne, whether a boy or a girl. And Prince George, should he decide to raise a family, and the firstborn is a girl, will be succeeded by his daughter and not by any successive male. And Harriet Baldwin refers to the House of Lords' posh glass ceiling in her article and calls male primogeniture in the House of Lords parliamentary misogyny baked right into the institution. I agree with Harriet Baldwin's analysis and the fact that the current position helps explain why only 13% of the land in the UK is owned by women. She cites the good example set by the monarchy. I have my doubts about the solution, however, if all that results is that class privilege is baked right into the parliamentary institutions. But moving on to the Commonwealth, which has been mentioned by many, I admire the fact that the Queen has supported the Commonwealth throughout her life and has attended Choggams even when some of our political leaders have been less than keen in attending. I was fortunate to attend 2 Choggams in Zimbabwe and South Africa and saw for myself the positive impact the Queen had on those gatherings. Bear in mind, the Zimbabwe Choggam was hosted by the late Robert Mugabe. Her Majesty has had to put up with some right rum-uns in her reign, both at home and abroad. I was pleased to see Lord Howell of Guildford's name on the list. He will do a much better job of doing justice to her commitment, to Her Majesty's commitment to the Commonwealth. Finally, my lords, when the Queen became the longest reigning monarch in 2015, Baroness Stowell of Beeston, who was the leader of this house, said, "All of us who seek to play a part in public life can have no better example than her." I endorse that statement and am pleased to take part in the debate.
My Lord, given our role as a revising chamber, there are very rare occasions in this House when one can indulge in unfettered praise, and rightly so. Today, however, is one of those rare occasions as we join together to joyfully recognise Her Majesty's unrivalled contribution to our national life. Hearing some of the tributes to Her Majesty today, it is not only striking that the Queen has been on the throne for 7 decades, 70 years, but that during that long period, her reign has been faultless. Her Majesty's sure-footedness is something which defies the imagination. Personally, I find it impossible to think of any comparable achievement. The wonderful words Her Majesty said on her 21st birthday, which the noble Lord Judge quoted, spoke of her devotion to service. Ever since those words, Her Majesty has adhered to that promise she made, steadfastly and on occasions with great courage. What the country owes to Her Majesty is incalculable. Through the many difficulties she has had to face up to throughout her reign, she never, even for an instant, wavered in her duty or from taking the right course of action. As already said, she is an example to all her people and to the world of the meaning of the word duty. However hard a decision might be, she always puts her obligation to her country in front of everything else, whatever her personal feelings and whatever the personal cost. One might think that behaving in such an exemplary manner might have made the Queen remote, but she never became distant from her people. Moreover, she has retained a wonderful sense of humour, as my noble friend Lord Forsyth has so delightfully demonstrated, and that I can humbly attest to.
My Lords, rather like my noble friend Baroness Donaghy, I find myself surprisingly pleased to be taking part in this afternoon's proceedings marking the Queen's Jubilee. I was not raised a monarchist, but it is nevertheless a huge honour and a pleasure to be able to take part because reflecting on the decades of her reign before arriving here today, it struck me that many of us have always been Elizabethans. How this period will come to be characterised in the future, it is too soon to tell. And it struck me that in our speaker's words, before we began our discussions this afternoon, he said that this period would come to be known as a time of extraordinary change, and I'm sure that he's right about that. Some of the most tumultuous events in modern history are still today very fresh in our minds. Pandemic disease threatening the lives and livelihoods of just about everyone on the planet is something that few of us expected to see. There have been moments during the last 2 years where the Queen's words and presence have led the nation in a subtle and yet powerful way. Her words during the first lockdown, when fear about the virus was at its height, and when there was no mass testing, no vaccination, just the harshest of restrictions, the Queen addressed the nation with a message of reassurance and hope. As others have said, the continuity that she embodies came into its own at that moment. She told us that we would all meet again. She told us that what we were experiencing was tough, but that it would pass. She knew what the nation needed to hear and articulated it with empathy and simplicity. Therefore, the loss of the Duke of Edinburgh in the spring of 2021, when restrictions were still in place, saddened many of us who may not have expected to be moved so much by his passing. I think we all know someone who died during COVID and can relate completely to the pain of loss made sharper by our inability to mourn in the way that we normally would hope to. No large gatherings or hugs with cherished relatives that we hadn't seen for far too long. The moving photograph of the Queen sitting alone at her husband's funeral spoke to the nation of sacrifice and solidarity, that no matter who you are, the rules are the rules. Her quiet dignity at that moment resonated in a way that no state opening or trooping the colour ever can. It showed a connection between the monarch and the people that ceremony and convention often obscures. So we don't yet know how the second Elizabethan era will be remembered, but we do know that Queen Elizabeth herself will always be admired, respected and loved by the people of this country for, let us hope, many, many years to come.
My Lords, today we're celebrating 70 years of service to the people of the United Kingdom, the realms and the Commonwealth by Her Majesty the Queen. And she is, as we've heard, the longest reigning sovereign in British history. She's seen enormous change, as we've heard, from the immediate post-war period to today. And those worlds are so very different. But the values of our society have remained the same, and Her Majesty the Queen has led us in maintaining those values through changing times by personal example. She has led our transition from empire through a changing and developing Commonwealth to reconciliation with others through her visits to Ireland and to Germany. Well, my Lords, like others, I have very fond memories of the coronation period in 1953. I remember going to a church hall at the age of 7 to receive my coronation mug. I am very proud of my coronation mug, and I still have that coronation mug. I remember watching the coronation on a flickering black and white television set at our local doctor's house. It was the latest technology we all aspired to. And I remember so well the coronation sports day in 1953 with the egg and spoon race, the sack race and the three-legged race. I was not, my Lords, particularly good at any of those three. But in more recent years, I've attended official visits of the Queen to Newcastle upon Tyne on several occasions. The opening of the Tyne and Wear Metro, the Silver Jubilee when she opened Eldon Square Shopping Centre, the A1 Western Bypass, the new City Library, the Great North Museum.
and, of course, the distribution of royal Maundy money in Newcastle Cathedral in April 1990. And I noticed on all these occasions that her visits and her walkabouts, to which she gave a lot of time and effort, always made a lot of people very happy. And it's one of the reasons why Her Majesty the Queen enjoys huge public support for her leadership, for her resilience, and for her consistency. She has earned our respect and our affection. And that is partly because she is not just head of state, she is head of our nation. Yeah, exactly. She senses our mood and she provides a crucial lead at key moments, such as in the recent pandemic. She promotes the values of community service and of charitable work, and she celebrates success such as with all the various Queen's awards. Well, the nature of the monarchy and how it might change, my lords, is for future generations. But for now, may I just say this? I think we are far better off with a head of state who is independent of politics and political parties and who can also be our head of nation. In 1952, Her Majesty promised to follow her father's selfless dedication, and she has done just that. And we now have 4 days of celebration to mark her Platinum Jubilee, and it's good to know that it's estimated that 1/3 of our country will be attending a street party. So, my lords, we say thank you to Her Majesty the Queen for her service, for her loyalty, and for her devotion to our country over the past 70 years.
Yeah. Well, my lords, I'm delighted to follow the noble Lord Shipley. I, too, like him, didn't excel on the sports field at the time of the coronation, and I failed to participate in any of the activities that were organised in Holbeach at the time. But I did get my New Testament, and indeed I got my mug, and I still have them. I treasure them. They've got a lovely little dedication in the front of the New Testament, which I very much treasure. I'd like to thank my noble friend, the Lord Privy Seal, the Leader of the House, for setting up this debate today so that we have an opportunity of paying tribute to our Queen. It's an unprecedented event. 70 years our sovereign. There's one thing certain and sure, that none of us here are ever going to see such an event again. But what a period of transition. Who would have been able to envisage the pattern of events that our own lives, our own national life would be, and how it would change when we saw those images of the young woman stepping down the aircraft steps after a visit to Kenya, drawn away prematurely from her visit to Kenya, to be greeted, among others, by Prime Minister Churchill. What a period of transition, as a noble and learned Lord Judge has said. More than we could have imagined at the time. The Commonwealth, which she has assisted to be a force for good in the world. A world in which travel and mobility are the experience of all. And let us go back to that fuzzy black and white image on our small black and white television screen in an over-large veneer cabinet. Who could have foreseen multi-coloured TV? Overtaken in turn by the computer, by the web, by the internet, by social media, by mobile communications. My lords, we live in very different times. During those times, as many noble lords have pointed out, the presence of Her Majesty the Queen has been a reassurance for us, for our nation, and for the Commonwealth. And my lords, we all speak from a position of privilege in this House. But I thought I would talk from a personal experience of a time before I came to this place, which indeed has brought me very much pleasure and satisfaction, and the moments I've been fortunate indeed to have been a member of the royal household. Indeed, the noble Lord Mewby and I were colleagues together, time as a whip and time as chief whip in this place. And I will have to say that I have loved my palace duties and the pleasure that state visits have brought, and the way Her Majesty has dealt with different heads of state are quite remarkable. Many here will know her better than I do, but take my word for it if you don't, that she is a delightful person to know. She loves horses, but she adores gardens and flowers too. And in this regard, I have some personal experience, because 37 and a half years ago, my family was appointed to the warrant holders as bulb growers to Her Majesty. Since medieval times, suppliers to the royal household have been warranted. There's nothing grand about this, but there are over 800 individuals and companies that are warrant holders, big and small, high-tech and low-tech. But the Queen's role in encouraging excellence through this system has been remarkable. Since 1840, there's been a Royal Warrant Holders Association, and I'm a great believer that sociability is a huge advantage to human progress. And we learn so much from each other. And my brother Roger is the grantee of the warrant, and he and the rest of us have benefited much from the encouragement of others and the companionship of others in the Royal Warrant Holders Association. It's been the source that our Queen, has given to ensure excellence in the many different trades, and like the Queen's awards for industry and for export, played a part in keeping businesses modern and competitive. I will, my lords, end by saying this, that throughout her 70 years on the throne of this country, she has shown faith, constancy and determination. She is a pattern for public duty and service, which we in this House, I know, seek to follow. Meanwhile, my lords, let us enjoy the celebrations.
Yeah. My lords, that I can only think of Her Majesty as a young queen. I wrote to her at her 80th birthday to tell her. That must seem very strange when she was 80 years old, and even stranger now, she's 96 years old. Let me explain, and to do so, I will take your lordships, if I may, back to the 6th of February, 1952. I was then a schoolboy, aged 13 years. It was a normal start to a normal school day, but by mid-morning, a rumour was passing round the school that the king had died. This was a great shock. He was only 56 years old. We knew then things were not well when the BBC shut down all its radio programs, the Home Service, the Light programme, and the third programme of those who can remember those days. It was a particular shock because we didn't know the king was ill. As young schoolboys, we didn't notice, insofar as we looked at newspapers, that the king looked awfully unwell a few days earlier when bidding farewell to his daughter, Princess Elizabeth, and the Duke of Edinburgh when they were starting a world tour on his behalf. So we learned on that very day that he was being succeeded by the young Princess Elizabeth, only 25 years old. But this was not much older than most of our school children. It was only 12 years older than me. That evening we had a broadcast from the Prime Minister.
He mainly directed his broadcast to a tribute to the late king. He made little mention of the new monarch until the end. And with great Churchillian style, he said, I must end this broadcast with an anthem and prayer of my youth, God save the Queen. Shortly afterwards, we heard at my school that the young Queen was paying a visit to Portsmouth. It so happened that my school was quite close to the A3, which was the road from London, or still is the road from London to Portsmouth. So we went, a group of us went to the roadside. The royal car then, on Her Majesty's directions, I'm sure, slowed down to almost walking pace. And we were able to have a wonderful view. This is my first opportunity to see Her Majesty, a wonderful view of Her Majesty. Next, my lord, came the coronation in June of 1953. The Queen was then only 27 years old. I was the only person in my family, I had some jealousy over this, who wasn't in the Abbey at the coronation. But I was allowed to go to the dress rehearsal where the Duchess of Norfolk, the wife of the Lord Marshal, took the role of the Queen. Of course, the Queen wasn't there, and that made her performance at the coronation a faultless performance, a particular credit to her. The next time, my lords, that I saw the Queen was 4 years later. She was then 31 years of age. I was doing my national service in the Royal Navy, and I took part in a royal review off the coast of Invergordon in the north east of Scotland. The review started with all the vessels then of the Navy, or as many of them could be gathered together, steaming past the Royal Yacht, which was only in very new use, with a wonderful gleaming hull. And when we'd passed as we passed the Royal Yacht, we doffed our hats. The next day, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh gave the whole day to be aboard HMS Ark Royal, the then leading carrier in the Royal Navy, in which I had the honour to serve. Her Majesty spent most of the day in the control of the ship, the bridge, which controls the movements of the ship itself, and FlyCo, which was in charge of the movement of aircraft when taking off and when landing from the aircraft. It was an exciting day, obviously, to Her Majesty, and it was always rather exciting to us. The aeroplanes were catapulted off the front of the carrier, and there was always a danger the catapult wouldn't quite function strongly enough, or the engines of the aircraft being taken off weren't sufficiently revved up. And there were occasions when the aircraft would dip and almost skim over the water before it got sufficient power to fly. The landing was also an exciting event. The method then was for the aircraft to have a hook at its stern and to catch one of the hawsers as it came in to land on the carrier. But there were occasions when it failed to catch the hawser, and then a frantic signal was given to the pilot to roar off the deck and hopefully not dip into the water. Her Majesty thoroughly enjoyed that and watched all the detail of the day. I was in the chart room as a very young navigating officer, which was very close to the bridge and FlyCo, and I was therefore able to witness Her Majesty deal with a problem. Her problem was she was in high heels and it was catching the decking on the ship. So she asked the captain if she could remove her shoes, and for the rest of the day she padded around in her stocking feet, still enjoying and still participating so much in the event. Although, my lords, I've had the honour on several occasions to meet Her Majesty in person in Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace and other places. These memories are quite indelible for me. The greatest tribute, therefore, I think I can give to Her Majesty has been her success in avoiding any expressions of views on political matters. It is true that she has very occasionally dropped a few hints, but for the most part this has been most rare. Her views on the Scottish independence were unfortunately leaked by Prime Minister Cameron, and I always thought that Her Majesty was anti-Brexit. It was going to badly disturb our status quo, as indeed I believe it has. But I simply, like everybody else, did not know what was Her Majesty's view on Brexit. So I feel I must end this short tribute to her with Churchill's words of his youth, which has been the anthem and prayer of my last 70 years, Her Majesty's last 70 years. God save the Queen.
My Lords, the breadth of wisdom, experience, and the accomplishments of Her Majesty the Queen, as well as the extent and depth of her service to our nation, are such that a single member of your Lordship's House can never do her justice. Most noble lords have spoken of that service and of her great contribution. As Her Majesty's Master of the Horse, I want to focus on the aspects of the Queen's life which involve horses, an area where I like to think she gets her enjoyment, her relaxation and excitement, but where she also makes a significant contribution to our public life. Perhaps her best-known equestrian passion is for her racehorses. She has owned winners of all 5 English classics, except, tantalisingly, the Derby, in which her Oriole came second in 1953, which incidentally itself sired a Derby winner. Amongst her best horses were Carrozza, which won the Oaks in 1957, Pall Mall, which won the 2,000 guineas in 1958, Highclere, which won the 1,000 guineas in 1974, Dunfermline, which won both the Oaks and the St Leger in 1977, an astonishing performance, and Estimate, which, despite not winning a classic, was one of her best horses, winning the Queen's Vase in 2012 and the Gold Cup the following year. Each of these horses won other important races, and Her Majesty has had and continues to have other very high-class and successful horses. These are just some of her bigger winners. Despite the difficulty of competing at the top today against the world's massive racing establishments, which are equipped to breed a multitude of foals to produce one good one, compared to Her Majesty's relatively modest number of broodmares, I think I'm right in saying that the Queen had her highest ever number of winners last year and has had no less than 5 winners in the month of May this year alone, and in addition 5 seconds. She looks sure to have a fistful of runners at Royal Ascot. The Queen's approach to the breeding of racehorses is that of an intellectual. Which bloodline will nick with which? Is the aim a sprinter or a classic horse? What are the logistics of getting the mare to the stallion, many of the best of which are overseas? The breeding of racehorses is a long-term game. The classics are run by 3-year-olds, and the planning of the breeding will not have been undertaken overnight. Luckily, patience is an asset of which the Queen is not in short supply. The naming of racehorses is or horses generally, is for the Queen something akin to an advanced crossword. What would one call a foal by the stallion, Knight of Thunder, out of a mare called Free Verse, but slip of the pen? Other noble lords have commented on the Queen's sense of humour. We were discussing the other day a horse she was unusually rather disappointed with. At the age of 96, she told me I could run faster than it in gumboots. But Her Majesty's expertise is not restricted to racehorses. As my noble friend, the Leader of the House, said, at the Royal Windsor Horse Show 2 weeks ago, she entered amongst others her homebred Highland mare, Balmoral Leia. Leia triumphed not only in her class, but as champion, and then also as supreme champion in hand mountain and moorland pony. The Queen takes, as I've said, a considerable interest in breeding, and in particular has been a strong supporter of some of our rarer breeds, just some examples of which are the Fell pony and the Cleveland Bay, the latter important to the world of carriage driving in general, and the Royal Mews in particular. The Queen also pays considerable attention to the life after racing of her horses, a notable example of which is her retrained racehorse Barbershop, formerly trained by Nicky Henderson, which ran with distinction in the Queen's colours, winning 8 races and being placed in the 2009 King George VI chase. He followed this up with a string of successes in the show ring. The Queen is well known to be an excellent horsewoman and indeed horsemaster herself, most notably when riding in her birthday parade in 1981, as my noble friend the Leader mentioned, when a teenager let off a starting pistol next to her. Her charger, Burmese, bounced. Her Majesty patted its neck and carried on as if nothing had happened. She rode in nearly 40 birthday parades between 1947 and 1986, 16 of them on Burmese, a gift from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and subsequently has attended in a carriage. I had a stark personal experience of the Queen's horsemastership when accompanying her round the stables at the Royal Mews before Christmas in 2019, so comparatively recently. We came to one rather excitable young horse whose stable door had been flung open, and between the sovereign and which there was only fresh air, and not very much of it. As its forefeet left the ground, I was calculating how it would be possible for me to insert myself between the Queen and the horse, bearing in mind that I had to navigate around or over either the Crown Equerry or the head coachman, to neither of whom it appeared to have occurred that a disaster of global importance was about to occur. While I was still working on it, and indeed while said horse's feet were still airborne, the monarch lifted a forefinger and firmly said, "No," at which the horse in question sprang to attention, and disaster was averted. My lords, I know that the entire horse world, like the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, would want to record its huge congratulations to the Queen on yet another extraordinary achievement in her Platinum Jubilee.
My lords, it's a great pleasure and honour to be speaking today in this humble address celebrating the Platinum Jubilee. And as I walked into the chamber today, I was delighted to see the doorkeepers also join the celebrations by decorating their office. My lords, the first visit to Burnley by Her Majesty the Queen was in 1955. Unfortunately, I wasn't around at that time, but I was around in 2012 as a major part of her visit to Burnley. I was working as a junior academic at the university at the time, and Her Majesty the Queen, alongside Prince Philip, visited the campus. And I had the responsibility to arrange a small corner of the atrium of where Her Majesty was visiting. And I was an academic, so we had the community development team and the youth work team and the public services. And each department had their PowerPoint screens up showing whichever subject they were. Except when I looked at the public services screen, it didn't say public services because the academic missed the L out instead of public. So as I looked at the screen, very nervously and sheepishly, I had the quick moment before Her Majesty arrived to change the word, which I cannot repeat, to public instead of what it was. And thankfully, that was a dignified visit by Her Majesty who remained. And as many lords have spoken so eloquently and passionately today, 3,833 public bills Her Majesty has seen, and 14 Prime Ministers she has seen in her time. What a remarkable record. As a proud royalist, I am honoured to be standing here as son of an immigrant from a Commonwealth country, somebody from an ethnic minority. And when Her Majesty spoke to myself, she made me feel special, as the noble and learned Lord Judge mentioned, by making people feel special. And although I had mature students with me, I remember, contrary to Prince Philip, who asked the mature students, what are you doing at university? You're surely too old to be at university. I had a pleasant conversation with Her Majesty around lifelong learning. The words, just from myself, I mean, I'm quite emotional, my lords, because it is a historic moment and I'm honoured to be speaking here. Unparalleled service, devoted service, service with fortitude and resilience. We, as a nation, are so lucky to have Her Majesty serving for so many years. And as the noble Baroness Lady Chapman spoke about the pandemic, I was mayor at the time, and I remember the difficulty all communities faced in this unprecedented coronavirus pandemic, and there we had the hope we needed. A famous philosopher said a quotation, he quoted, "We can survive 40 days without food, 3 days without water, 8 minutes without air, but we cannot survive 1 second without hope." My lords, Her Majesty the Queen has been providing us hope for over 70 years as Her Majesty the Queen, but also she continues to provide us hope. And just to finish off by the very interesting point made by the noble Lord Forsyth, I was trying my best to see Her Majesty in the last few months. I lobbied hard to get a ticket for the Queen's state opening, but unfortunately she wasn't here. And I lobbied hard to get a ticket where I saw noble lords across the House yesterday in the garden party. And unfortunately, because of ill health, she wasn't there. But I will tell you one thing. I will be lobbying hard to ensure the House of Lords moves to Burnley so we can have a Queen addressing the state opening in Burnley. Thank you, my lords.
My lords, it's a real pleasure to follow the noble Lord Khan of Burt with his special and much more youthful perspective than some of us. I rise to support the motion in the name of my noble friend, the Leader of the House, in an excellent speech, and as others have done, to congratulate Her Majesty the Queen on the 70th anniversary of her accession to the throne. It's a very joyful event, as the noble Lord Judge has said, a joyful event for the people of our country and for those of the Commonwealth. I've always been conscious that I was born in the year of Her Majesty's coronation. So I'm a coronation baby, and still the proud owner of a commemorative coin given to me to mark the occasion. I collected stamps from an early age and grew to love that handsome sideways head and on increasingly decorative stamps from across the globe. And for the brief period that I was the minister responsible for recommending the design of new postage stamps to the Queen, I discovered that she also has a very, very fine collection. Later, I was responsible for the Royal Mint in Wales, when we issued the 12-sided, bimetallic, counterfeit-resistant new pound coin, and it bore the unmistakable portrait of the Queen. And I should add that in my early years as a civil servant, I had a wonderful black leather briefcase with E2R stamped on it in gold, which I carried with great pride. I'm not a new or a late supporter of the Queen. Throughout my life, the Queen has been someone I have admired. She is probably the most famous woman in the world, a supreme professional to make every career woman amazed by her composure, her work ethic, her charm, her humour, and her judgment. She's also been a loving wife, mother, and grandmother at the same time. How much she must miss her rock, HRH, the Duke of Edinburgh, after their many years together. A tragic loss under COVID, described so well by the noble Baroness Chapman of Darlington. I met Her Majesty for the first time in my Tesco days at a Red Cross reception to meet those of us involved in helping after the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami in Thailand. And she spoke with much obvious affection for Princes William and Harry, who've been working with us, packing relief parcels for some of the unfortunate victims. Finally, I should mention Her Majesty's passion for racing and for breeding racehorses, so well described by my noble friend, Lord de Morley, the master of the horse, that there is nothing to add. I just wanted to say that sadly she does not have a horse in the Derby next week, but I will be cheering to the roof-tops as I hope I'm sure and I hope that she will win at Royal Ascot. It's a great honour to speak today, and like others, I offer my thanks for Her Majesty's duty, for her fortitude, for her sacrifice, and offer my warmest congratulations on her unrivalled, record-breaking Platinum Jubilee.
My Lords, I'm very pleased to be able to follow the noble Baroness Lady Neville Rolfe in order to have the opportunity to congratulate Her Majesty the Queen on her Platinum Jubilee, and also, like others, to express my respect and admiration for her many years of service. But unlike many other previous speakers, I can't remember the coronation, and I've never actually had the pleasure of meeting the Queen. I did meet her mother once, but I think that's a story for another day. But as the longest-serving monarch that this country has ever seen, as with almost everybody in the country and beyond, she has been a constant presence throughout my life. And so when coming to this debate, I was thinking about what form that has taken, what has that meant? And I had a very ordinary upbringing, but I can remember a very, very early memory of me, I was very small, was being taken with other children and my family to stand at the roadside with my flag, because the Queen was coming. She was coming to our town. And it was so exciting. Everybody was there with our flags. And it's something that I've never forgotten, that huge excitement. And then later on as a child, I had school trips to the Commonwealth Institute, as I'm sure many of you did. And I loved going there. For a sort of country child to go somewhere to see so much culture and difference and look at the world outside my own small place was something that I found very precious at the time. And we all learned so much from what was there. And the Queen's commitment to that Commonwealth and the institute that was there for children to learn was a very important part of my childhood and has been important, I think, for many, many people right around the world. And then my next memory is of the Silver Jubilee back in 1977. And again, as you know, still quite young then, but again, it felt like the whole village had climbed Beacon Hill to light the beacon. And we stood there and we watched all the other beacons lighting up in the distance. And again, what an extraordinary experience. And then the cherry on the cake for me was that there was a party at the big house. And the big house was Highclere Castle. So, and I tell people about that today when we watch Downton Abbey. I've been there to a party. But it was, and then moving on, the privilege of being elected as a member in the other place, of being able to go to a garden party in Buckingham Palace. Again, what a privilege. And then to come here and to be able to kind of pledge my allegiance to Her Majesty and to do the work that we do here and to be part of your Lordship's house is the greatest privilege of my life. And I think now about how the Queen has threaded her way through my life and how it's threading its way through my children's and my grandchildren's. My grandchildren, I had a photograph from my daughter-in-law this morning with my grandchildren with their faces painted with Union Jacks and all dressed up to go to their Jubilee party at their nursery school this morning. And the Queen has had such a huge influence on generations of this country. And it has been such a positive influence, such, I think everyone feels much more calm and secure when they know that she is there, basically with us. So I'd just like to end to say, I hope she enjoys her Jubilee celebrations as much as all the rest of us, and wish her all my best. Yeah.
My Lords, it's a privilege to speak in this debate and to follow my noble friend Baroness Hayman with that. And she sought to remind us, I think, of some of the things that are important across our country today and beyond. I was speaking to my wife this morning, who was taking our granddaughter to school, and she was singing the national anthem, which she'd learned at school yesterday. And I just think that is such a wonderful thing, because across our nation, in schools and nurseries across our nation, this is what young people will be doing. They'll be learning about the Queen, learning about our country, and learning about values which are important. And I just want to make one important thing, which I think, one important thing, which I think builds on things that some noble lords have been saying. And that sometimes there's a way in which we regard things like duty, like service, like patriotism, as almost old-fashioned values, as somehow they're not relevant to today. When I say this, I'm pleased that my children, when they were at school, I'm pleased my grandchildren, and I'm pleased the children of this country are learning those so-called old-fashioned values, because I think they're important. I think they're actually what Lord Forsyth mentioned in his excellent contribution, where he spoke of the fact that many of our institutions in this country are under threat and under attack. And for another day we can discuss that. But for today, the institution, and for the Platinum celebrations, what we're doing is we're celebrating an institution which brings our country together, which overcomes the divisions that we have sometimes within our own country and beyond. And sometimes we need to remember what brings us together. And that's why I'm so pleased we have the opportunity of this Platinum Jubilee celebrations. And the Queen, Her Majesty, has been a phenomenal example of that throughout her reign. And many of us can point to people she's met in the Commonwealth and so on, and how she's tried to bring nations together. I just wanted to mention one thing, which I think absolutely shows the Queen, and I think it was Lord Howard mentioned this, where she put duty and service above herself and above personal angst. And that was when the Queen met Martin McGuinness. I cannot imagine anything more symbolic, anything more self-effacing than when she put aside everything that she must have felt in order to serve what she thought was the public duty that she had, to meet Martin McGuinness in Belfast with Peter Robinson stood beside her. And she did that because it was in the interest, she thought, of her country, of her people, and for peace. And I think that selfless devotion that she's shown to that all the way through her reign has been something that we can all admire. So I join with others here in saying that the magnificence of the reign, the way in which she sets an example to us all, the joy she'll bring next week through the parties and all of the celebrations, are a reminder to us all of what is important, what matters, and the fact that country, that people, that community are as important now as they ever have been. And for that, we should be eternally grateful.
Yeah. My Lords, it's a great pleasure to follow my two esteemed former parliamentary colleagues who both made superb speeches. And we've heard many really quite remarkable speeches. But I want to make a few short personal reflections, my Lords. When I was first elected in 1983 for North West Norfolk, my predecessor, Christopher Brockbank-Fowler, gave me some advice. He didn't give me much advice because he was pretty angry I'd beaten him, but he did say that you will, on occasion, have the privilege of meeting Her Majesty at different events, and you might even, if you were very, very fortunate, be invited to Sandringham. And my strong advice is to make sure that you are extremely well briefed on everything to do with the Sandringham estate, everything to do with the 4 or 5 villages on the estate, and above all, go around the 2 studs and learn what you can about the horses, because those will be the things that Her Majesty may well ask you when you are honoured enough to meet her. And that was really very, very good advice indeed. And we had a remarkable speech from Master of the Horse, and I wasn't aware that last year was her best season ever as an owner-breeder, and I'd imagine that every one of those 31 horses was actually bred by her. A huge achievement in an age when she's up against the giant racing organisations from around the world. During Her Majesty's visits to Sandringham every year, she would invariably go and visit the local WI, and she would invite into Sandringham House the recipients of various royal prizes. But she would also, every year, pay at least 3 or 4 visits to local organisations, to the local hospital, to factories. She would go and open different village halls, and she really did make an effort. And we were very fortunate in North West Norfolk to benefit from this. But certainly, I remember on so many occasions, she was very pleased to meet the dignitaries and the chain gang. But I could see her impatience and her enthusiasm to get on and go around the factory or around the hospital. And once one of her ladies-in-waiting said to me, well, of course, Her Majesty does always like to meet real people. What quite she had in mind about the chain gang, I don't know. She loved coming to our local town hall, and she paid a number of private visits to King's Lynn Town Hall. Obviously, King's Lynn was once a borough in its own right. It's now part of a borough council. And the mayor was taking her round with some other people on a private visit, and he was showing her some of the great treasures, some of the cabinets full of really quite remarkable treasures that are part of Lynn's history. And she spotted the original mayoral chain, which was a good deal more elaborate and valuable than the one the mayor was wearing. And the Queen said to the mayor, do you ever get to wear that chain? And the mayor said, well, Your Majesty, yes, when we have special visitors. I don't know what it is about seaside air and royal visits that can throw a mayor of a borough, but as that mayor has sadly long since passed away, I'm not embarrassing either him or his family. She once came to visit the Construction Training Board, the National Construction College, which was in my constituency, but because it was a major regional event, quite a few MPs were there as well. And Her Majesty arrived on this occasion with Prince Philip. And the Lord Lieutenant said to Her Majesty, isn't it really, really good news to see all these MPs here? Before Her Majesty could reply, Prince Philip said, I suppose you could say that if you wanted to, but I don't know why on earth they aren't at work. We felt a bit deflated by this. And Her Majesty turned to the Lord Lieutenant and said, Timmy, of course it's marvellous to see the MPs here. And we did feel a great deal better after that. She once came to my rescue, and I'll never forget this, on a purely personal level. It was the 75th anniversary of the RAF at RAF Marham. And it was a big event, and I got a VVIP invitation. And I'd never had a VVIP invitation before in my life. As a young MP, I felt rather chuffed. And I was assembled with these other people in this particular enclosure in this very large room in the mess. And I said to the group captain, isn't it good news? We're going to be meeting the Queen. And he said, well, I wouldn't count on it, because I thought we were VIPs. And he said, no. There's a VVIP group and a VVVIP group. And then, of course, we got the Chief of the Air Staff and the Marshals of the Royal Air Force, so you'll be lucky to meet the Queen, Henry. And anyway, about 20 minutes later, the Queen appeared, and across the mess, about 20 feet away, she caught my eye, and I did a little bow. And then she turned to the group captain in the station command and said, I would like to go and talk to my MP. I think he was slightly thrown. But Her Majesty then came across the two groups of VVVIPs and VVVIPs and came and said hello and shook my hand. And then she said, I hope you'll be joining us later. And I said, well, I very much hope so, ma'am, but I'm not counting on anything. Anyway, the seating plan at lunch was suddenly changed within the next 5 minutes, and I was promoted to the top table. And that was only a small example of that extraordinary warmth that she shows to people. And so many noble lords have mentioned that ability to put people at ease and to really make the recipient, as I think Lord Newby and Lord Shipley pointed out, to make the recipient feel so much at ease and to feel so special. So, my lords, we live in turbulent times, both internationally and within this country. And with so many crises that are taking place at the moment, with the growth of the ugly growth of separatism and republicanism in Northern Ireland and Scotland, there is, in the midst of all of this, stands our monarch, who shows that continuity, that exceptional example of service and dedication, which Lord Howard of Rising mentioned, that constantly reassuring presence. And the result, I believe, my lords, is that at the end of this really quite remarkable Jubilee year, the Union and the monarchy will be that much the stronger. And so the country really has a huge debt to Her Majesty. And so we pay that respects to her, honour that debt, and long may she reign over us.
Well, my lords, it's today a great pleasure to follow that delightful speech by my noble friend, Lord Bellingham, and with its many interesting anecdotes. I think one of my earliest memories, I'm a contemporary of the Lord Hackett, and one of my earliest memories is indeed of being shushed by my parents to listen on the radio to the King. I think because the Queen has reigned for so long, her beloved father, and she still regards him as such, has tended to be forgotten by many people. Of course, most people in this country have lived only in the reign of our Queen. But he was an extraordinary unifying force during the last war. My parents almost venerated the King. And there was tremendous sadness when he died, as Lord Hackett said, at a young age, most people not being aware that he was very ill. And I remember at my school we were all issued with black armbands, and we wore them until after the King's funeral, itself a most extraordinary, solemn occasion. And all of your lordships will have seen the photographs, and as far as I was concerned, that was a year before television, of the three queens together. Our Queen, the Queen Mother, and Queen Mary. And it was an extraordinary sight. And of course, we'll all remember too the photographs, and Lord Hackett referred to them, of the Queen landing from her plane and greeted by her Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, who she regarded as a very, very great man indeed. And of course, he was. And this morning, I went to the Ascension Day service in the Abbey. But as I sat there, I inevitably thought of this debate we're going to have today and of the events of the coronation. An extraordinary day, which I watched, as Lord Hackett did, on a very grainy television, in the drawing room of our choir master, Mr. Bradley, and every time the national anthem was played, we stood up. And of course, the rain and Queen Salotte were perhaps two of the imperishable memories of the coronation. But my lords, I never thought, as a schoolboy then, that I would have the enormous privilege and honour of being present at the three Jubilees we have celebrated in Parliament. the Silver Jubilee in 1977. 10 years ago, of course, the Diamond Jubilee. And the one that was most personal to me was the Golden Jubilee. I happened to be treasurer of the CPA at the time, and together with the chairman, had the enormous privilege of escorting Queen and Prince Philip around Lancaster House and presenting the various groups of Commonwealth parliamentarians who'd gathered for that special conference. And what was remarkable was, of course, that they had been to all of their countries. And when I presented the Maltese delegation, of course, that was where the Queen and Prince Philip had perhaps the happiest days of their life before she succeeded, because he was there as a naval officer, she was there as his wife, and they knew so much more about Malta than the Maltese MPs who were there. And the same was true of many of the other countries. And some of the little remarks that they made as we moved around about the countries and the people, I wouldn't dream of repeating on the floor of the House, but what they showed were two things: a wonderful knowledge and a real affection. And the affection among the Commonwealth parliamentarians was palpable as they were greeted their sovereign and Prince Philip. It was quite extraordinary. She has been, my lords, a thread of continuity and a rock of stability throughout our lives. And I count our country extremely fortunate in having a monarchy. The 40th from William the Conqueror. But of course, since the Roman legions left in the 5th century, we've always had a monarch, even before the creation of England, and of course much, much later, the United Kingdom. There can be no monarch who has ever given more devoted and more wonderful service to her people than our Queen. She has been the epitome of all that is best in our national life. And when I think of the divisiveness of political heads of state, Trump in America, for instance, the recent rather bitter election in France, which resulted in the return of President Macron, which I personally am pleased about, but that's by the way, to have someone who can unite the people by not being allied with any political party or faction, and can also give this extraordinary continuity through many, many decades, in the case of the Queen. It is the word, there's no word that's more abused in the English language than the word unique. But we are, my lords, living through a unique period at the moment. And clearly none of us will ever see this again, but probably nobody ever in the history of this country, certainly not for many, many decades, even centuries, will have this opportunity to honor someone who for 7 decades, the biblical term of life, has been at the forefront of all that is best in the United Kingdom. We've heard some marvellous anecdotes today. We had a wonderful account from the Master of the Horse. We had a very moving speech from Lord Judge, and from Lord Coker a few minutes ago, and Lord Khan of Burnley. Well, the only thing I disagree with, I hope she's never invited to open a House of Lords in Burnley, and we shall all do our best to make sure that never comes about. But how wonderful that we in this House today, which is so special, and we have that constant reminder of the Queen, we are all united. There is nothing that divides us today in our affection, in our loyalty, and in our admiration. Long live the Queen.
It's always a pleasure to follow Lord Cormac and to hear what so many noble lords have said in this humble address, because this moment really does recognise something distinct. We're celebrating relentless hard work, tireless commitment, loyalty, dignity, and respect for duty by the longest-serving monarch in British history. The changes that Her Majesty has seen over 70 years, as many lords have noted, is quite astounding. And in my part of the United Kingdom in Wales, the heavy industry that I grew up with in the mining areas has largely given way to financial and other services. Indeed, the United Kingdom itself is very different. Power is dispersed to other parliaments in the four nations, and movement to and from the Commonwealth, the European Union and beyond has fashioned a more diverse and multicultural people in our society, as noted by my noble friend Lord Khan. This is a time for us to come together in recognising these incredible attributes and pay our respect to Her Majesty the Queen. The Platinum Jubilee will offer us a rare, once-in-a-century opportunity as a nation to put aside divisions and to take time to value community, public service and loyalty to others. And throughout her life, Her Majesty the Queen has been an exemplar of the importance of public duty. What is also undeniable is the depth of affection and respect in which she is held, and it is an affection and respect that has not been taken for granted, but through her actions, she has always endeavoured to earn the trust and respect of the British people. Perhaps the most significant and long-lasting connection between Wales and the Queen grew out of her empathy as following the Aberfan disaster that dreadful Friday afternoon in October 1966. I was a schoolgirl in Pontegwaith Primary School, 3 Valleys along, and I stood in the schoolyard after lunchtime along with my friends, and we prayed for the children of Aberfan. Despite the close proximity, I'd never heard of that place before that day, but I've never forgotten it since. The Queen continued to make visits to the village over the decades and indeed has visited Aberfan more than any other member of the royal family. During her long reign, the Queen has been a witness to the history of many such events in our nations. She has experienced those changes firsthand and has been the constant thread that runs through the life of our nations. The first time I saw the Queen in person was at Buckingham Palace at an event in 2009, that summer. It was also the first time that I'd visited Westminster, but those two events are entirely unrelated. I was struck by her luminescence. She simply shone. The next time I saw her in person was in your Lordship's house in December 2019 when attending my first state opening. And the moment of seeing her again in person was singular, especially as now I was one of her trusty and beloved servants. God bless you, ma'am. And as we say in Wales, llongyfarchiadau ar eich Jubilee Platinum. Congratulations on your Platinum Jubilee.
Very good. My Lords, it's a pleasure to follow the excellent speech of Baroness Wilcox of Newport. My Lords, as many have said today, it is one of the greatest privileges of my life to be able to stand in this House and honour, as her humble citizen, our extraordinary Queen. I thank God that 70 of my 77 years have been under her reign. This unprecedented period of peace and growing prosperity has in good part been influenced by her faithfulness to her position. How has our Queen been able to be so consistent and gracious to all her subjects over these 70 years? I've only met her once, but I remember the kindness of her smile. Knowing our own frailties,
We are all in awe of her constancy. The answer, and here I follow the speech of the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Birmingham, lies in her continuous confession of her trust and reliance on God her Father and Jesus her Saviour. Her biographer, William Shawcross, said, "Two things stand out: the Queen's constant sense of duty and her devotion to God. Of this she speaks humbly but openly, and especially in her Christmas broadcasts. She was clear during her first Christmas broadcast in 1952 that she would not have the strength to serve unceasingly without the prayer of the people of the Commonwealth and Empire, and humbly asked for that as she prepared to dedicate her life at the coronation. She referred to this on her 90th birthday, saying, "I have been and remain very grateful to you for your prayers and to God for his steadfast love. I have indeed seen his faithfulness." She is right. Millions of Christians have faithfully prayed for her to live long, for her kingdom to be at peace, and for the common good. Standing back when we see her reign in the context of the grand sweep of world history, these prayers have been answered spectacularly. To my mind, her Christmas messages have all been about responding to the example of her Lord Jesus, who came to serve, not to be served, to give his life as a ransom for many. Who knows? She has possibly been advised to universalize her message and talk blandly about the season, or wish everybody happy holidays. I suspect if she has needed to resist such siren calls, she will have done so because she knows her Saviour and her Saviour knows her, because of an ongoing relationship. At key moments, she has referred to drawing strength from God, which comes from that daily walk with him. Such strengthening is not just needed in extremis. It becomes the default for people like the Queen, who are constantly required to put others' needs ahead of their own and take others with them on a difficult journey. I have heard say that there are two types of people in public life: those who want to be something and those who want to do something. Her Majesty is possibly unique in that she has had no choice but to be both these types of people simultaneously. She has done a tremendous amount, as many noble lords have pointed out today. Serving in the Second World War, for example, continuing to fulfill onerous royal duties into her 90s. But she's also had to embody an ideal, never an easy thing to do, especially as the composite of that ideal has shifted considerably since she ascended the throne. The expectation in the 1950s, when the country was finally beginning to slough off post-war austerity and set its course for a new era, was that she should embody serenity. Many royals across the world are, after all, known as Serene Highnesses. There was also an expectation that the family she raised would be an ideal example. Later in her life, after more than one annus horribilis, she found herself being criticised for being too serene, certainly not emoting enough, especially when it was clear that her family was not so much an ideal example as a typical one. To live successfully in the public eye for 70 years and necessarily to maintain legitimacy in the public affection has required a very strong sense of identity. Identity is how we see ourselves, in contrast to image, which is how others see us. Just like a socially held ideal, a personally held identity does shift over time. We grow older, we move up the generations. Hopefully we grow wiser. Identity is a very live issue in the zeitgeist today. The received wisdom is that identity should be something entirely self-made, and that the ability to realize that ideal increases in proportion with wealth, status, and the autonomy these convey. the Queen is a monumental exception to that formula. Her identity, what she is and was able to be, has always derived from her royal responsibilities and a sense of duty and service. In this, she is less unique than people realise. Her Christian faith means this would have been the case whatever her station in this earthly life. For Christians, their sense of identity flows not from wealth, status, or even ethnicity, sex, gender, or whatever. Rather, it flows from their relationship with their Lord Jesus Christ, from whence flows, as St. Paul writes in his letter to the Galatians, the fruit of the Spirit which characterize her life: love, joy, peace, goodness, kindness, gentleness, patience, faithfulness, and self-control. To reiterate, prayer has been an indispensable element of the support she has received from so many people. Turning to the New Testament as I close, in the first chapter of Paul's letter to Timothy, his first letter to Timothy, he urged that petitions, prayers, intercession, and thanksgiving be made for kings and all those in authority. I want to thank God for answering these prayers for Her Majesty so very graciously. I cannot think of any other figure who has done what she has. She is the Queen of the world, known and revered by so many in so many different lands. I spoke with an Australian friend of mine last week about this debate. He said, "The Queen's sense of duty and service are a wonder of the modern world." Yet she would be the first to give credit to the noble King of Kings and Lord of Lords, whom she serves, to acknowledge that the esteem in which she is held is further evidence of the undeserved grace she has been able to draw on, to lean on every day of her life. We never want to lose her, but the day will surely come when she passes through the veil into eternity and stands before her King. Then he will say, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Come and share your master's joy." So I congratulate my gracious sovereign Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, on her Platinum Jubilee, and I thank my Lord for her.
My Lords, it is a pleasure to follow the noble Lord, Lord Farmer, and to hear his very warm words about the strength and many qualities of our Queen. And it is my great honour to speak in this historic debate today to pay tribute to Her Majesty on the most splendid occasion of the Platinum Jubilee, which will be cause for celebration up and down the land and across the Commonwealth and beyond. My Lords, I very much enjoyed preparing for my speech today, not least because it gave me a very good reason to again watch the unforgettable clip of the Queen's own starring role in the Olympics opening ceremony, which the noble lady, the leader of the House, rightly drew our attention to right at the beginning of this humble address. And not only did the Queen have her own starring role, of course, in the opening ceremony, but we also were treated to the sight of Daniel Craig as James Bond being besieged by corgis rolling around at his feet. And this film, of course, was just the warm-up before Her Majesty the Queen actually walked into the stadium to a rapturous reception and to give a major surprise to her family. And in that moment, I am sure that the Queen was crowned the monarch of monarchs, showing the world her spirit and her great sense of fun, in this instance, as her qualities always are, given in the service of her country. But, my Lords, I was particularly taken with the story about the dress that was worn as the Queen seemingly parachuted into the stadium and equally at the same time wore said dress to actually enter the stadium. Now, only the Queen's personal assistant and advisor, and not her seamstresses, knew why two outfits were needed. The second version was made in total secrecy for the stunt double, And even those working on the making of the dresses, which, by the way, used very elaborate and beautiful materials, as we will remember, including silk, lace, beads, feathers, and enamel, even they didn't understand why there were two identical outfits being made. And to this point, I would like to say a word about Her Majesty's signature style of clothes. My lords, the overwhelming thing, amongst so many other things about Her Majesty's reign, but this one, in terms of her clothes, is her absolutely steadfast support of British fashion. She exclusively wears British-made clothes, and the British creative industry could not have had and have a better ambassador. My lords, as the former Member of Parliament for Lincoln, I had the pleasure of welcoming the Queen to the city. However, it is the style of the coverage by the Lincolnshire Echo of the opening of Pelham Bridge in 1958, a little bit before my time, that really drew my attention for the purposes of this debate. With only black and white photographs of the day as part of the article, the Lincolnshire Echo gave readers a very thorough description of what the Queen was wearing. They said, she wore a mustard-coloured cape-style raincoat with a full back in proofed silk. Her turban hat of soft blue had an interwoven strawberry pink band. Her Majesty also wore three-quarter grey gloves and black court shoes, and returning to the car, she removed her raincoat to reveal a soft woolen dress in the same shade of blue as her hat. Her only jewellery was a 3-rope pearl necklace and pearl button earrings and a silver bracelet. How absolutely marvellous. As was, of course, the reception by the people of Lincoln, who stood in the pouring rain to catch a glimpse of the royal visitors. "Lift your brolly, miss," a woman on a looker shouted, and a man next to her said, "I'm going to see them even if it does mean I'll get pneumonia." Well, that's the spirit of Lincoln for you. I should also add that the article did also fully report the Queen's remarks, including that Pelham Bridge was a bold and imaginative solution. Her Majesty said it was an example of this country's skill and ingenuity in making the changes necessary to satisfy requirements of modern life without destroying the heritage of the past. Well, those words have stood the test of time, and indeed the Queen herself has made the changes necessary to satisfy the requirements of modern life without destroying the heritage of the past, and for that we are grateful. My lords, on the royal family's website, the Queen is accurately described as iconic and celebrated. I would like to close my remarks by offering another word for consideration, beacon, which in this context is defined as someone that guides or gives hope to others. And so, as the noble Lord Judge reminded us, when the Queen, then Princess Elizabeth, spoke on her 21st birthday in a broadcast on the radio from Cape Town, she said, I declare before you all that my life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service. And so it has been and continues to be so. And for so many years, Her Majesty has undertaken this with the late Duke of Edinburgh by her side. May his memory be for a blessing. Her Majesty the Queen has been and continues to be a beacon to the people of our nation and beyond our shores, giving hope and guidance. So we thank you, Your Majesty. You have given us more than we could ever have hoped for. Long may you reign.
Well done.
My lords, what a pleasure to follow all those who've offered their praise and gratitude to this remarkable person who's reached this milestone moment in the history of this country, and I have nothing but pleasure in adding my voice to theirs. I want to pick up and begin my intended remarks in a slightly different place, following my noble friend Baroness Mellon here. and simply because I met the Queen once in Balmoral when her attire and her sartorial sensitivity was quite different from the one you described. She wore a woolly jumper that she'd clearly worn habitually and for a long time, and a plaid skirt, and she sat with us, a little group, I being the president of the Boys' Brigade at the time, and there to, by her invitation, because she's patron of the Boys' Brigade, and she wanted in her year of office, her Golden Jubilee, her Diamond Jubilee, I'm sorry, to see all the charities with which she was associated. So there we were. And it was a week or two after the much lauded appearance for the opening of the Olympic Games. And I had to make a speech. And I began by saying how much we'd admired the way she had made that parachuted entrance and come in to surprise everybody, and how good it was to see how closely she'd worked with James Bond, and that the star role that the corgis had played had pleased us too. There was a corgi at her feet as I spoke, and I said, "Well, was that one of them?" And she nodded. I said, "Where's the other one?" "Dead," she said. And I promise you, as an accomplished and, well, I hope I'm an accomplished public speaker, I was stopped dead in my tracks. I was furiously inventing the next sentence, and it was to send forth a young man who was going to replicate the sending of the Olympic torch around these islands at the opening of the Olympic Games, but ours was to be a message from Her Majesty the Queen to the Boys' Brigade Annual Council to take place that year in Cardiff. And so she, with great pleasure, handed a baton that had been given to the Boys' Brigade by her grandfather, King George V, and a champion runner from Scotland then took it on the first leg, and 3 weeks later, in Cardiff, it came in the hands of another runner and presented to me. So I had given it to her, and I received it back from her, and I read how glad she was to greet the president of the Boys' Brigade, but she'd said that before she sent it, and it was rather lovely to have the circle completed in that way. The only other time I met Her Majesty was when I was introduced to her at a children's charity by the then Speaker of the House of Commons, George Thomas. And he said, as he introduced me, "This is the President of the Methodist Conference." "Oh," she said, "and what does the President of the Methodist Conference amount to?" I think she said amount to. And I said, "Well, half my job is cheering up the troops, and the other half is representing them to the larger world outside." "Oh," she said, "bit like my job." And those occasions have shown me her in a light that I would never otherwise have seen her in. My studies, academic studies, were in literature and theology, and in both of those disciplines I learned how important symbols are. And my thinking about symbols has always been part of the way I look at life in general. And one moment that I want to refer to, I think with some feeling, was as a child in South Wales, a mystery that I've been wrestling with all my life. We were in dire circumstances. I was brought up in one room in a brickyard in penury. I don't tell that tale in order that you reach for your clean handkerchiefs, but in order to say that in this rather bare hovel that I lived in, with one window and no toilet, we slept, we ate, everything in the same room. The walls were unadorned except for 2 pictures. They were taken from a newspaper and stuck with flour paste that we used to make to put the Christmas decorations up. And there were pictures of Prince Charles and Princess Anne, both as young, if not babies. Anne was a baby. And I've never understood how the most remarkable woman in my life, my mother, who was brought up within the constraints of dire poverty, literally having nothing, could keep a place in her imagination for whatever it was that these two pictures represented. And the capacity of the monarchy to free itself from all the stuff about wealth and privilege and all the rest of it, to penetrate to something deeper than those mere mechanistic and arithmetical considerations, is astonishing. It truly is. The other occasion, when I was 11, my brother was 10, still living as I've just described, when my mother insisted, in the wettest of wet Welsh days, and I promise you, they can be wetter than anywhere on the earth, up through the town, from the little place on the building trade supply where I lived, to the top of the town, to Achthi Corner, in the shadow of Jerusalem Chapel, and the windiest place in Buryport. Why? Because Her Majesty the Queen, just crowned, was going to be going through in a car from somewhere west of us to somewhere east of us. And we caught a glimpse of her as she went past, and I've always struggled to understand how my mother could feel that was the most important thing she wanted us two boys to do that day. So it is grappling with the mystery of the monarchy as much as its obvious, wonderful external manifestations that has been part of my understanding, or my attempt to understand, just what happens in these august fields. I shall never forget the pictures of her, unaided and already in advanced years, walking up the steps of to the library at Trinity College in Dublin, and turning around when she got there to greet the assembled company in the Irish language. I shall never forget what that amounted to when all the backstage discussions and negotiations and quarrels and all the rest of it were taking place. A symbol that could achieve more simply by it happening visually, imaginatively, than quite a lot of what happens in more tedious and circumlocutive ways. And so we want to honor such a person who at so many levels in the public consciousness and within our national culture plays a role and touches places that other products can't reach. For a teetotal Methodist, that was a good allusion, I think. And then my final remark would be simply picking up, but not developing in quite the same way what the noble Lord Farmer said. I find the way that she manifestly speaks her Christian faith to be so charming. As a student of theology, I know it took 450 years to frame what we now call the Nicene Creed. All the shenanigans that went on, all the circumlocutive language within which it's framed, the different styles of the speaking of Greek around the Mediterranean world, Pope Leo I sending in his troops to say, if we don't get this creed today, we're going to just do something drastic to you all. And we got the Nicene Creed. The Queen opens her mouth, and she mentions the name of Jesus Christ as if he's her friend, and in a non-excluding way. Oh, I know people who mouth religious language. Of course I do. But sometimes in a way that feels partisan, sectarian, us against the world. She is what she is, and the way she says it says to a Jew or a Muslim or a Hindu or a person of no faith, I just want you to know who I am. For me, all these things are profound, and add to all the catalogue of ways in which we could recognize that this is and that that's. And I want to pay my tribute and do it not only from experience that I've had, but out of the disciplines that I've been immersed in for the whole of my life. God bless her.
My Lord, it's a great pleasure to follow the noble Lord setting out so eloquently the mystery of the monarchy. What a wonderful occasion to celebrate Her Majesty the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. And I would like to add my good wishes on the motion for a humble address, so beautifully moved by my noble friend, the leader of the House today. First and foremost, the the Queen is a fantastic role model, particularly for those of us who are women in public life. In her exceptional long service, spanning 70 years, Her Majesty has managed to embrace both continuity and change. Her reign has been characterised by her remarkable relationship and extraordinary marriage to Prince Philip. And through their extended family, they are related to many of the royal families across Europe. As co-chair of the All-Party Group for Denmark and as a proud half-Dane, I welcome the fact that there is a particularly close relationship between the British and the Danish royal families. And it is particularly fitting, perhaps, that her cousin, Queen Margrethe of Denmark, celebrates her Golden Jubilee, celebrating her own 50 years on the throne. Both offer a shining example of constitutional monarchy at its best. And I think that Queen Margrethe's attendance at the memorial service for Prince Philip reflects the closeness of the two royal families. The Queen's love of racing has featured throughout the humble address, most notably by my noble friend, the Master of the Horse, Lord de Morley. And I pay tribute to the occasion of her visit to Royal Ascot at York, which transformed North Yorkshire that week in June 2005 into a state of high fashion of which the noble lady Baroness Merrin would be proud, as well as a perfect celebration of all that racing has to offer in the north of England. And indeed, in the words of the noble Lord Khan of Burnley, how fortunate we are to have welcomed the Queen to Parliament on so many state visits, such occasions being watched over by our ever-vigilant Black Rod and our glorious sovereign doorkeepers, who always ensure these visits and indeed the workings of Parliament go so smoothly as they do. I remember on one occasion I didn't have the good fortune to be introduced to the Queen. I was in the line-up to meet Prince Philip, who was on very good form and was immensely charming and humorous as ever. But I did manage to almost trip the Queen up on her way out of the palace that day. And I say, would you not like to have stayed longer? And she said, indeed I would, because I have to now go to the dentist. And I think that sums up her wit, humour and presence of mind. I, for one, am pleased to have lived in this Elizabethan age all my life, and pleased to contribute today to the humble address on the occasion of Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee. May God bless her and keep her safe.
My Lords, I'm very pleased to contribute to today's debate and have heard with great interest a range of contributions from noble lords paying tribute to Her Majesty in celebration of the forthcoming Platinum Jubilee. As usual in your Lordship's house, as varied as the speeches have been, they have actually gelled together extremely well to paint a full picture of her remarkable life and work. A number of noble lords have related their own very memorable and moving experiences of actually meeting the Queen. While I've not had that privilege, my own memory is as a very young working-class child living in South London in the post-war early 50s, celebrating the Queen's coronation day, having my own coronation dress, coronation mug and coronation doll, but not a beer mug, as the noble Lord Newby was able to recollect. I was also convinced that I saw the Queen's carriage go along the street I lived in. However, unless the carriage passed down the Old Kent Road and Camberwell Green on its way to Buckingham Palace to Westminster Abbey, that memory is obviously a very mistaken one. But I do also remember all of us sitting listening to her coronation around a very crackly wireless. What was clear, even at that young age, was the strong and solid support that the monarchy enjoyed among working-class communities struggling to recover from the devastation of the Second World War. The young princess, shortly to become queen, provided people with hope for the future, and as we've heard, during her long reign, has succeeded in retaining and building respect, trust and admiration across the UK among our very diverse communities and nations. We've also heard very much today about the Queen's very famous work ethic. In the short time available, I would also like to underline this in respect of her unique role in supporting charities. As we celebrate her long reign, the recent research by the Charities Aid Foundation has shown she is among the world's greatest supporter of charities, helping to raise over £1.4 billion. Clearly, she's ensured that the royal family maintain this and as a central part of their work. The Queen is patron to 519 charities, including Cancer Research, the British Red Cross and Barnardo's. Her wider family support 2,215 charities in Britain, rising to nearly 3,000 worldwide. My Lords, the Queen is patron of one of the excellent charities I'm involved in, the Stroke Association, and her role as patron is greatly valued and appreciated by the association. I've been a strong supporter of their work since joining your Lordship's house in 2010 and as a carer of a disabled stroke adult recoverer. Stroke strikes every 5 minutes in the UK and 100,000 people have strokes each year. It's the leading cause of death in the UK and of adult disability, with over 2/3 of people suffering a stroke leaving hospital with disability. The Queen's sister, Princess Margaret, died of a stroke after having had several previously. The Princess Margaret Fund for Stroke Research was established in her name. It provides a unique opportunity for people who care about stroke to invest in areas of stroke research that have the greatest potential to change our understanding of this disease and develop new life-saving treatments. My Lord, stroke research is vitally important to drive improvements in care and treatment, but it has been historically underfunded, receiving only a fraction of the research investment in other comparable life-threatening conditions. Annual research per stroke patient in the UK is £48, but for cancer it's £241, so there's a great deal of catching up to do. Stroke is a complex condition and a wide range of healthcare professionals are involved across the stroke care pathway, from GPs and primary care, ambulance paramedics, hospital doctors, specialists and nurses and support staff, through to key rehabilitation specialists. The Stroke Association is campaigning rigorously to ensure that acute staff shortages in many areas of the stroke pathway can be addressed, and in particular for the game-changing acute treatment for many strokes, thrombectomy, to be available to all who would benefit from it. Thrombectomy is an extremely cost-effective treatment which reduces the chances of disabilities such as paralysis, blindness and aphasia. So watch out for the Association's July campaign on this vital issue, which I feel certain Her Majesty would fully approve of. My Lords, I too am very much looking forward to the Jubilee celebrations, and I pay tribute to all those who've worked so hard and played such a vital part in designing, planning and organising the exciting and imaginative events and initiatives taking place up and down the country. The one I would especially commend is the inspirational Queen's Green Canopy to plant a tree for the Jubilee. As well as inviting the planting of new trees, the QGP highlights 70 unique and irreplaceable ancient woodlands across the UK. We've seen how hundreds of families, especially children and children's groups, have taken up the challenge to plant trees, with special environmental and horticultural projects running alongside the Canopy initiative to encourage young people in particular to get involved and to think about taking up careers in this important work through such initiatives as the Junior Forester Award. The BBC's excellent Country File programme has played a key role in building understanding of how crucial trees are for people and nature and for encouraging communities in all parts of the UK to be a part of the Green Canopy. The need to both protect our existing wood stock and increase the percentage of the UK under tree cover could not be more important to the future of our planet, and having the Green Canopy as an inspirational and core part of the Jubilee celebrations reinforces this crucial message. Finally, I would stress that I'm particularly pleased and honoured to be attending the National Service of Thanksgiving to celebrate the Platinum Jubilee at St Paul's Cathedral next weekend. I'm very much looking forward to what will be a very memorable occasion.
My Lords, I join with everyone who's spoken in this debate in congratulating Her Majesty on this unique milestone. My Lords, it's important to recognise the contribution of the Queen not only to consolidating the position of the monarchy in the United Kingdom, but also her contribution to national and international governance. She has consolidated the position of the monarchy as being above politics. The monarchy has moved from a position of active engagement in the political life of the nation to one of political neutrality. That has been the direction of travel since the late 19th century, but it has been achieved notably during the Queen's long reign. Now, some people wonder what's the point of the monarch if she exercises no powers. But by transcending politics, she has strengthened the position of the monarchy and to the benefit of the nation. The noble Lord Janvrin captured the position eloquently in his piece in last week's edition of the House magazine, when he wrote that her role as head of the nation is being about the soul of the nation, embodying, expressing identity and national mood, providing a sense of stability and continuity to allow for and facilitate change, recognising success and achievement, and supporting the idea of service to others. She can bring people together in a way that politicians cannot. She holds prerogative powers that she exercises on advice and powers that she exercises where she relies on convention or practice, but which serve a purpose for still vesting in the Crown. The fact that ultimately she could employ them is important. It's symbolically important in signifying that although ministers exercise the powers, there remains a higher body to which they owe a duty in exercising them. Loyalty flowing to the Crown is also important for protecting our system of government. Ironically, an unelected monarch serves as the ultimate protector of the political institutions that have displaced the sovereign as the body that governs. As Gerald Kaufman said in the Queen's Diamond Jubilee year, what she has done in making the United Kingdom a permanent democracy, a democracy that is impregnable, is perhaps the greatest of her many achievements. My Lords, having a monarch operating above the fray of partisan conflict reflects the value of a parliamentary as opposed to a presidential form of government. In a presidential system, the positions of head of state and head of government are vested in one person. In a parliamentary system, the head of state and head of government are separate. The head of state can thus represent the unity of a nation in a way that a partisan figure cannot. In practical terms, it also makes for a useful division of labour between the monarch exercising essential state functions and the Prime Minister focusing on delivering public policy. Her Majesty has contributed to national governance not only by demonstrating, by virtue of holding the Crown, that ministers have a high authority and that the loyalty of public bodies is to the Crown, not government, but also in being, in practice, a repository of knowledge, as has been mentioned already in this debate, able to advise successive Prime Ministers. As Tony Blair observed, she has an absolutely unparalleled amount of experience of what it's like to be at the top of government. 4 of her 5 most recent Prime Ministers had not been born when she ascended to the throne. During her reign, she's known American presidents from Dwight Eisenhower onwards. The value of her advice has been attested to by successive Prime Ministers. She represents not only a repository of knowledge, but also someone who's not a political rival. Judging from occasions when she's made public utterances, and again this has been touched upon, she appears to have a knack for asking the right questions. The same would apply to her meetings with Prime Ministers. As Gordon Brown recorded, her questions are designed to get the best out of you. She has contributed internationally, not only by engaging the interest of other world leaders, an invitation to the Palace or Windsor is something not likely to be turned down, but also at times by soothing tensions at head of government conferences. She's also fulfilled a major role in cementing the relationship between the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland, as has already been touched upon, not least in her state visit to Dublin in 2011. It was, as Paul Flynn said in The Other Place, a very powerful symbol of reconciliation, which I believe will have a profound effect on healing the wounds that have disfigured life in the island of Ireland for generations. She is a major source of the nation's soft power and enhances the reputation of the United Kingdom. An Ipsos Mori global survey in 2018 found that views of the royal family had a net beneficial impact on people's views of Britain. My lords, the Queen has helped shape the monarchy, being generally deft in knowing when to act and when not to act, and enhancing the position through her dedication and obvious commitment to service. It's worth remembering that she did not ask to be Queen, she was not born to be Queen. But when circumstances beyond her control led to her becoming heir apparent and then Queen, she dedicated her life to the services of the nation, as we've heard so eloquently throughout this debate. I don't know many people, indeed anyone, other than the Queen, who has served in the same job for 70 years and done so with such dedication. It's entirely fitting that today we pay tribute to what the Queen has done and the contribution that she's made to the life of this nation.
My lords, the many varied and heartfelt tributes that we've heard today bear witness to the Queen's extraordinary service throughout her 70 years on the throne and the genuine affection with which she's held. And for my part, I've really found this an uplifting debate to be involved in, which I can't always say in terms of my position at this dispatch box. But I hope all noble lords will agree that we've heard some wonderful stories and some real, I think, heartfelt tributes to Her Majesty. And contributions from all sides of the House demonstrate the real gratitude of this House for all Her Majesty does and continues to do for the nation. So on behalf of us all, we send our sincere thanks and good wishes to the Queen, and we are all looking forward to celebrating her Platinum Jubilee next week.
My lords, may I add my warmest congratulations to Her Majesty the Queen on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of her accession to the throne. The tributes we have heard today from all sides of the House share the gratitude that this House and the nation owe her for her extraordinary service throughout her reign. It is therefore my honour to put the question today. The question is that the motion for a humble address be agreed to. As many as are of that opinion will say content. Content. The contrary not content. The contents have it, nemine dissentiente. Questions on a statement made in the House of Commons today, Economy Update.
My Lords, I'm grateful for the noble lady giving us the opportunity to respond to this statement. These are incredibly difficult times for people across our nation, but much has been clear for several months. So the obvious question is, why is action only being taken now? My Lords, many will see this as an attempt to spare the Prime Minister's blushes after the publication of the Gray report, which we debated last night, rather than a sign that this government is on their side. My Lords, inflation is running at a 40-year high and is yet to peak. According to recent analysis, the inflation gap between the richest and poorest is growing, meaning low-income households are bearing the brunt of the cost of living crisis. As the Chancellor acknowledged in his statement, we expect the energy price cap to rise by a further £800 in October, and this will take the bills to the highest level since records began. This crisis is hurting everybody, but it will hit those at the bottom of the income distribution the hardest. The Institute of Fiscal Studies predict that by October, the poorest 10%